to the Beetle and Grimm's Pandemonium Warehouse Shopping Network. Shipping Goblin Bob here is going to tell you all about our new Platinum Edition. It's my favorite.
Thanks, George. Friends, are you tired of putting a cat, a flask of poison, and a source of radiation into a sealed box and having to settle for a cat that's dead or alive? Well, Beetle and Grimm's Pandemonium Warehouse has the product for you. Introducing the Schrodinger's Cat Platinum Edition. With the Schrodinger's Platinum Box, you can have both versions of your pet at the same time. Free yourself from objective collapse and enjoy a cat that simultaneously exists in two decoherent realities. It's time for atomic indeterminacy to enter the macroscopic domain. It's time for Schrodinger's Cat Platinum Edition.
Yeah. She's totally dead. But totally alive.
Only from Beetle and Grimm's Pandemonium Warehouse. Simultaneously available and sold out now.
Hello, welcome to Band of Badgers with a very special What's in the Inbox unboxing, digital unboxing, which it's not really an unboxing because there's no box, but it went into my email. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to call it a digital unboxing. I am Lee, your storyteller and host for this evening. And here we have with us our very special guest, Matthew Dawkins from ONYX PATH, the in-house line developer for
Hello.
everything. Hi.
Well, not everything, but a lot. World of Darkness, Scarred Lands, that they came from games. Yeah, various things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We also have with us Rime, who plays Fi, the Malkavian, on our Sunday vampire game. So we're going to say a quick thank you to Beetle and Grimm's, who has been our supporter, and all of our supporters who helped us. Our theme music is Hip Jazz by Ben Sound at bensound.com. If you'd like to support us to create more fun content like this, you can do so by subscribing to our Twitch channel, and then you can see all of the fun stuff we do. Like on Mondays, we have the Great British Brush Off, where you can watch us paint minis. On Tuesdays, you can watch and all of the other fun Nordic Cryptid Hunters Invasion by Free Liga. Thursdays, we still have Rise of the Runelords by Paizo. Saturday, the Badgers podcast drops. And if you listen to it, you personally delight the specific Chris who runs it. And then on Sundays, we have Vampire the Masquerade. So tune in and watch us play the Vampire the Masquerade, the Badger game. We just finished Barcelona and we're on to the new city after the break. We are having a short break for Easter and also my daughter's birthday. And then we're just going to sit here and say thanks to everyone who's here to join us tonight. Hello. Thank you. So glad to have you. We're going to get started and ask some questions with Matt. So one of the things you brought up, really excited for, they came from beneath the sea. They came from beyond the grave. Let's take a quick step away from vampire before we go.
That's a swerve, isn't it?
Yeah. What can you tell us about these fun things?
Well, they came from Beneath the Sea and Beyond the Grave. Beneath the Sea is a 1950s B-movie inspired role-playing game. So very much Invasion of the Body Snatchers, them. It came from Beneath the Sea. Movies like that. It can be played seriously, it can be played humorously. It has various cinematic powers within it, such as cheap sets, so you can run straight through walls, deleted scenes, so you can insert flashbacks, missing reels, so you can get out of dodgy situations and jump ahead in time, that kind of thing. It's a lovingly illustrated book. Look at that, I had a copy right beside me.
Oh, wow.
It's a game of my devising. I came up with a concept for it and developed it for ONYX PATH Publishing, who own the license to it now.
Yeah.
And Beyond the Grave, which is available for pre-orders still, is available on BackerKit right now for pre-orders. And that covers much the same kind of thing, except it's a horror genre game. Takes inspiration from the Hammer horror movies of Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, Britt Eklund, the Amicus movies, lots of portmanteau stuff like Tales from the Crypt, Asylum, Roger Corman monster movies, that sort of thing. Very much 60s, 70s vibe.
Ooh.
And all that they came from games exist so that the players can have fun. They're not what I would call deep and meaningful games. They're not games that necessarily require a great deal of introspection. They are games that allow players to play as if they're in the movies, usually fairly cheap and hammy and wooden acted movies, but that's a lot of the fun that goes with them. You can buy cards that go with it, that have things like quips, pithy one-liners on, that the more you play that one-liner, the more advantages you get, so you can end up having a character that says the same damn thing over and over again.
Can you give us an example?
So the example we use in the book is a character saying something like, smells like mama's apple pie. Now, in a case where your character walks into a diner, that may be a perfectly appropriate thing to say. And congratulations, you gain an advantage on your next dice roll. However, let's say you have just ripped a crab man's head off, and you then decide to say, smells like mama's apple pie. As long as it's entertaining, it doesn't have to be appropriate. It can be completely incongruous, but as long as it's entertaining, you gain an advantage.
Okay.
The more times you use it, the more advantages you get. So your characters kind of become quip machines as the story goes on to invoke the bad acting and bad dialogue of that kind of movie.
I could see it being appropriate, though, if your mama's apple pie was, in fact, a crab apple pie.
Yes, very good, very good. Nice wordplay there.
There you go.
But yeah, Beneath the Sea, before lockdown, Beneath the Sea was getting quite popular at conventions because it's a game that makes people laugh. People are just being silly around the table. And my experience running it and my colleagues' experience running it at cons was that people would want to find out what you were playing or what you were running because of all the noise, which may be a pest if you're trying to play something a bit deeper like Vampire or Cult or Wraith on a table beside it, but never mind them. They came from games. The headline is fun. And you can get Beneath the Sea on Drive-Thru RPG and also in stores. And as I say, Beyond the Grave is currently available to pre-order. We've got They Came from Camp Murder Lake coming, which is 1980s slasher movies. It's a big source book for Beyond the Grave.
I was going to say, that sounds just like, literally like summer camp.
Yeah.
Like, teenagers running scared. Proper classic B-movie.
And we have another one called currently dubbed They Came from Classified, because we're not revealing the title or the subject matter, but there is another one in development. So there's lots of They Came Froms in the pipeline.
That sounds fun and exciting. I love terrible movies. Like, it's my thing. I will watch a terrible movie over and over and over again because I just love trash. So the chance to actually play a game where I can be trash. Be the trash you want to see in the world, really. The trash was inside us all along. The real trash was the friends we made along the way. Yes, I love that sort of stuff. That terrible cliche, all that. Yes, so we're going to have you come back and talk more about that because I'm super excited about it. It's something that's really near and dear and close to my heart. So
yeah, I would love to.
Maybe after Vampire is over, we can look into that.
I mean, we're only 5 minutes in. I'm saying I'd love to. This may be a complete disaster from here on out.
Yeah.
Only time will tell.
Yeah, I'll hedge my bets and I'll say probably.
And I think that's going to be my quip for the entire game. Only time will tell.
Yeah.
Oh, it looks like we have our first question from a viewer. Do you see that?
Yes. Alan has asked, sounds a little like Tales from the Floating Vagabond. Was that an influence here?
It wasn't. I am aware of Tales from the Floating Vagabond, but that's got a more fantastical element to it. I guess Tales from the Floating Vagabond, there's that's a really good reference because not many people mention that game these days. And it's one of the first, I guess, really evocative genre games that I guess made its mark. And I'm a big fan of it. I wouldn't say it really influenced the game so much. My influences for They Came from Beneath the Sea were primarily Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, which is a TV series, a comedy TV series. because I first used the mechanics that have been put into They Came From Beneath the Sea in a game that I ran which was All Flesh Must Be Eaten, which is a zombie horror game. But I used to run a Halloween special called All Flesh Must Be Dark Place. You played the characters from Altgarth and Merengue's Dark Place, and you had their lines from the TV show on your character sheet, and you'd gain bonuses if you said their lines from the TV show. It was all very simple stuff, but people enjoyed it sufficiently that I then started thinking, okay, well, how can I actually work this into something original? And that's kind of how that mutated into what Beneath the Sea became, which initially was going to be that they were two separate ideas. The idea of having quotes that empower you, which is just one part of the game, right, and having a invaders from beneath the sea element, which was very much inspired by a video game called XCOM Terror from the Deep, which was an old isometric video game I was a big fan of. I did a Let's Play of it on my YouTube channel many, many years ago. And I wanted to do a game where you were playing aquanauts fighting aquatic alien terrors. And in the end, the two ideas came together because my aquanaut game was very dry and very mechanically heavy and not fun. I ran it a couple of times at a convention and it went badly. But then I started merging the two and everything kind of came together.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. We'll have to talk to Dave about doing something like that. Maybe is there a jump start for the They Came From games?
Yes, I mean with the Beneath the Sea has a ready-made characters book. It has a scenario book, a bestiary. We have a separate jump start in its own right coming later this year as well. But if your crew wants to run it before it comes out, we can provide you with a manuscript. That's not a problem.
That sounds exciting.
So, of all the B-movie Griblies, which one is your favorite?
That's a good question as well.
There's a lot of Griblies out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's something quintessential about the Gill folk or Gillmen, sort of Silurian types. They have an archetypal appearance, which I think people associate with that sort of 1950s era of B movie, very rubber suited. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Although that would be a crossover, the creature from the Blue Lagoon, seeing Brooke Shields being chased around by the creature of the Black Lagoon.
My bad, sorry.
I don't know, I'd buy it. But my favourite one in the book is crab folk, they're basically humanoid crabs that wear human skin suits. They're all communists, and they can only walk sideways. So they're trying to imitate humanity and infiltrate their blue-collar working-class industries. But yeah, they're also wearing very badly fitting human suits and shuffling sideways while extolling the virtues of Marxist-Leninism.
But do they not smell like Mama's apple pie?
Well, you'd have to rip one's head off to find out.
That vaguely reminds me of the slight silliness that comes with the little computer game Octodad, where you're a octopus pretending to be a human. It's crab people pretending to be humans. That's beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah, very much so.
So we're big B movie fans. We're excited. We'll have to pin this and come back to it later because we are actually here to talk about Vampire, and we're here to talk about the V5 Vampire 5th edition books that we are using in our Vampire the Masquerade campaigns that we run on Sundays, which is the Badger game. It's a lot of fun. It's a little serious, a little silly, and a lot of fun chaos goblin energy. Many explosions so far.
Good. Games should be silly. They should have an air. They shouldn't always be hopelessly, relentlessly dark. No. To my tastes, anyway. They need a little bit of silliness.
So, if you have any questions about this, about Vampire 5th Edition or anything for Matt, you can just ask him. We'll see it in the chat, and we'll ask him. You can ask anything, anytime. You can also use your channel points by pressing the badger icon at the bottom to highlight your message, and then we'll see it a little easier so it doesn't get lost. So let's, without further ado, go ahead and move on to the first book we have to talk about, which is Chicago by Night. All right, and here we go. That should be coming up now. And I really loved this book when I got a chance to sit down and read through it. I designed one of our preludes in Chicago, actually. And I didn't actually go through the book because I was trying to get it all done really fast. I'm sitting there reading through the book these last few days and I'm like, damn, that would have been really good to put in there. Oh man, I should have used that. That would have been amazing. Oh, this is so cool. My mom's from Chicago, and what I really loved about this book is it really got the feel of Chicago in there. It, from the art direction to the language that you use to everything that was in there, it was really very referential. It had these images that look and feel like Chicago when you're looking at it. Like one of the pictures I pulled for this to talk about it was the girl in the Cubster scene referencing Wrigley Field as she's eating the guy. So like that was cool.
I think we may have even called someone a jagoff in the book.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It was so like that's Chicago. Like I can read that and like I can hear my tias talking about what they're gonna do and when we gotta go down to Division Street and stuff like that. You have the map of the L and the picture of Capone's jail cell. It's just so cool. I loved that you had maps of Chicago in there. Like you can actually see where things are. It's a really good reference point. It's a good handout if you're going to play a game set in Chicago. That was a lot of fun for me. And for me, it was just a really fun book to do. Is there some reason why you chose Chicago? Because I know there's Chicago by Night and other editions, or is it just coming back to an old favorite, or do you want to just update it for modern times? What's going on with the choice to do Chicago?
Well, first, thank you very much for saying all of that. That's very kind of you. Really, very, very nice. And thank you also for mentioning the maps. You're the first person, I think, in an interview with me, at least, who has ever mentioned the maps in the book. And honestly, they were a bit of a late addition to the development. I know I'm kind of starting at the end of development by talking about them, but I always have to weigh up in my mind when I'm developing a book or giving art notes to our art director, whether something like a map is cost effective, whether players are going to use it, whether storytellers are going to use it, because this isn't a game that is played with miniatures as a general rule, that kind of thing. So the fact that you really like it, it means a lot, and it tells me something, so thank you.
I love a map. I love a map for a game.
As for why Chicago, I mean, Chicago was the quintessential city for Vampire in previous editions. Some people may say it was Gary, Indiana, but I wouldn't say Gary really works as a big city source book, at least not to my tastes. Chicago had a book for first edition and a book for second edition, and didn't have one for revised edition. We contemplated whether to do one for V20, and that never really panned out. So the fourth edition, effectively. And so when V5 came around, it felt like the natural first city source book to be made. I don't know if there will be other city source books on this scale. Because it is a big book.
It is.
And it isn't just there to tell people about Chicago. It is also to act as a template for any other city you choose to use, because a lot of the characters, while they may have bits and pieces that tie them to specific parts of Chicago or Chicago culture, can be lifted and placed in whichever other domain you wish. But yeah, it's kind of a book for all seasons in that regard, because yeah, it's a city with a flavor. I'm very happy you think it feels like Chicago, because I likewise think the writers did a fantastic job, and the artists did a fantastic job in evoking that. And I've only been to Chicago once as a tourist, and it left a mark on me, but I deliberately hired authors who came from Chicago in many cases, or nearby, because again, that voice is very important. So yeah, it was the first book I think we pitched at ONYX Path for Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. And Paradox approved it without any difficulty, the pitch, the outline. And so after that, it was sort of off to the races. And the question was how to write something of this size. And yeah, that was an undertaking.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I wish I had read it earlier, and then I could have put all this cool stuff in there that was there. One of the things I really loved about it was the use of the relationship maps that you see. That's really cool and thematic to Vampire 5th edition. I love it because it's something that ties into my sociological background, and you can see how people are connected and how that ties into each other. So I thought it was really fun to see how these coteries work together as distinct groups. And that, I think, was something that was missing from previous editions. You can see how everyone interacts with each other or doesn't. In some cases, there's no interaction between certain people. But you can also see how they do, and if this person likes that person and whatever.
Yeah, the coterie chart was present in 1st and 2nd edition, but again, it kind of died off a little in revised, and we didn't really have much cause to use it often in V20. So it was very important. I think it was our creative director, Rich Thomas, who said he really wanted to see coterie charts back in Chicago by Night. He felt it was one of the strongest points of the original Chicago by Night, which he was a part of because he was with White Wolf of old way back when. So I agree. I think, like you say, they're very useful for showing you the interrelationships between SPCs, the various vampires around the city. But what they omit is also important because not every vampire should know every other vampire. Some of these creatures do sort of live as little islands or exist as little islands and don't interact with the rest of kindred society, which means stumbling upon them can be a terrifying or enlightening experience depending on the vampire you're encountering. But yeah, I think the coterie charts definitely fulfill their function. One of the biggest challenges of developing something like that is, and it's not hard, it's just something to remember, is not every single relationship needs to be opposites.
Right.
It's very easy, especially in a game like Vampire, to have Prince Kevin Jackson saying over, I don't know, Horatio Ballard, I hate this fucking idiot, and Ballard saying, I hate this young upstart. But I guess in that respect it's the same, but you could also have Kevin Jackson saying I really look up to him and him saying I really hate him. But if you have that same kind of adversarial relationship all the way around the chart, in theory the domain should just implode. So we wanted to demonstrate the vampires do get on. They do find common cause on some level. Sometimes it's political, sometimes it's philosophical or religious or just personal. And I think the coterie charts do that.
Yeah. I think one of the best things that the coterie charts highlight is the diversity. And I think that's another thing that ties back into the reflection of Chicago itself, because it's a hugely diverse city.
Yeah.
And you can see that as with all the SPCs that are in there, that they have this, like, it's not all one person or one stereotypical thing. And that's something we get into as we look at some of the other books, when we get into the real exploration of what these different clans and these character types can be.
Well, as you say, Chicago is an incredibly diverse city, and that was another reason we chose it. And also it informed the way we reflected Chicago's vampire population in the book. It was clearly a deliberate choice on our part to make the Prince of Chicago a black man. And honestly, one of my only regrets regarding the book, in a way, although it's not something that was purely within my control, was using a character like Kevin Jackson as the Prince, in that I didn't want the man in charge, who also happened to be black, to be a criminal, because it's quite often the case that characters of color, people of color, are depicted, especially in American drama, as being of criminal background. And Kevin Jackson is depicted as, in previous editions, as coming from gangs, a gang culture.
Yeah.
So it was important to us, important to the writer of Kevin Jackson as well, to legitimize him, to make it clear that he wasn't just sort of going the Stringer Bell in the Wire route of having a cover identity of legitimacy. He was someone who has, in the preceding 20 years since the last Chicago by Night came out, reinvented himself. He still has some of those contacts to the street or the underworld, if you like, but he also is the legitimate head of various enterprises and programs in the city, because that helps his masquerade and it helps him receive a legitimate form of income, which is something a lot of people forget about playing vampires. It's how the hell do you get money? How do you pay for clothes and cars and things like that? Do you just dominate it every time out of someone?
I mean...
So making sure that we're not only representing diverse characters of diverse backgrounds, but also doing so in a way that's not stereotypical, was sometimes you had to check yourself on as a developer or as a writer. It's very easy to fall into the trap of stereotype, and sometimes stereotypes are good because you need characters to exemplify the expectations, but you also need characters who go against the grain and subvert that expectation.
Here we have somebody saying Kevin Jackson is the most improved SPC, and I have to agree with that. Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm very happy you think so, and I think, again, the writer did an amazing job on that. Chris Spivey, the developer of Harlem Unbound, Chaosium book for Call of Cthulhu, was one of the writers on Chicago by Night and wrote Kevin Jackson. Where possible, and it isn't always necessarily obligatory to do so, but where possible, we had writers who were people of color writing the characters who were people of color, because we felt like they would lend more authenticity to the character voices. So when you've got characters like Francois Mamuwalde, you've got characters like Adzi and Crook and so on, they're all written by people who can speak a little better to the backgrounds that those characters originate from. So that was important to us. And I don't know, I've got my preferences for characters who I feel have developed better since previous editions, and I'm glad you think Kevin Jackson has. But yeah, I've certainly got favorites in the book.
One of the things that really stood out to me and that struck me as being part of the authentic Chicago experience and really hit those resonant notes for me was it that these characters did have that authenticity in their voice, that that it sounded like people I knew. You know, I'm not from Chicago, but my family's from Chicago, and I know these people. I've been to their house. I've sat down. I've had coffee with them. You know, we've played cards. You know, it's very familiar. It's very, very comforting. Do we have another question, Stacey, from the audience?
There is a question in the audience. We've got, who is your most improved SPC? Because you said you have your favorites, so here's your chance. Who are your favorites?
So if I really want to, if I want to be purely egotistical, I would say I am very happy with Edward Neely, who's also a Ventru, and the reason for that is not necessarily due to his character, but he was the first character written for V5. He was present in previous Chicago by Nights, but we hadn't formulated the templates, the way we would lay these characters out and so on. And so I wrote Edward Neely as an example for the other writers. Okay, so this is the template you follow. So there's a special place in my heart for that very sad former Sabbat Ventru. But in terms of characters who have also received significant development, I quite like what happened with Critias, the Bruja Primogen, who for the last 3,000 years, potentially, the exact number escapes me, has been basically under the blood bond and mental dominion of a supposedly benevolent Methuselah. And now that Methuselah's been beckoned off somewhere, Critias is realizing that he himself, Critias, is a bit of an asshole. he has been this learned philosopher, teacher to the other kindred in the domain, and he still is acting that way. But he's getting increasingly petty and vindictive and maybe even homicidal because he no longer has the shackles on him that he resents, but may have actually been keeping him in check for several millennia. So I quite like that twist. And also, in terms of a character who's really gone downhill, Olaf Holt, or I guess Lodin is in there as well. I keep picking on Ventru.
It's okay. They're easy to pick on.
Yeah, good. They deserve it if any clan deserves it. Well, I don't know. The Tremere often deserve it too. Yeah. But yeah, I love how far he has fallen, given he was the first prince really given a profile in first edition Vampire, next to Modius and Gary. And he was archetypal in the fact he had his straight blonde hair, steel blue eyes, high cheekbones. He was a chiseled Nordic champion of the Ventru. He was also a bigot and a tyrant and all kinds of other things. And between first and second edition, he is wiped out in the supplement Under a Blood Red Moon. And now we brought him back in V5 because one of my design instructions to the writers was, if there's a character that was supposedly killed in Under a Blood Red Moon, come up with a justification for why they weren't. And we can put them back in, if you want to put them back in. And there were some restrictions, namely that some of the characters present in Chicago by Night First Edition were characters from the novel The Jungle, which is set in Chicago in the 1920s, literally name for name, and even their profession. They had been pulled from that novel and put in Chicago by Night. And so I said, yeah, let's try not to include all of them. But we've still carried a couple over. But yeah, I was very happy with what became of Lodin. He's an utterly miserable and pathetic figure now, but you never know. He also might just be wild enough to destroy Elysium and place himself as the sort of almost rat prince of Chicago.
Why not?
Yeah.
I've got a small question.
Yeah.
We've been bashing on Ventrus a fair bit, but which clan do you like the most?
I hate all of them.
Cheat.
I have more affinity with the hunters, I think. Now so my decision on this sort of question changes frequently depending on what I've been writing. For V5, and to be honest, before V5, my preference has strongly been the Hecata, or the Giovanni, or the Cappadocians. Hard C, they're not soft C, if you want to be completely correct. I know everyone says Cappadocian. I used to say Cappadocian, and it really doesn't matter because language changes. But for now, I will start calling them Cappadocians because Greeks had hard Cs. Either way, yeah, I think the Hecata, in part because I've got a lot of pride invested in them, and also they were the clan back in their Giovanni saga days that really drew me into the lore of Vampire the Masquerade. A lot of people played the Giovanni saga, the Giovanni Chronicles of old, and it's strange because they were never anywhere near the most popular clan, and they couldn't be. They were never part of any of the major sects. They were always independent, and yet they had this 4-part chronicle based all around their clan. There wasn't a Tremere Chronicle, it wasn't a Bruja Chronicle. There nearly was, but it got cancelled.
That would have been exciting.
Yeah. I think it would have been a Dark Ages chronicle from memory. But yeah, the Giovanni became that sort of font of lore in a strange way, because despite the fact they were completely removed from much of the main meta plot, they had their own meta plot that was massively rich, and at the same time divorced them from the rest of Kindred Society. Mm-hmm. So I became really invested in them when I first got to know Vampire the Masquerade, and one of my objectives with V5 was finding a way of making the Hecata a little more integrated, a little easier to play, more accessible, more interesting to the wider player base. And I think we succeeded with that in Cults of the Blood Gods, which I know we'll be talking about in a while. Yeah. I think the Hecata come off very strongly. There are some people who love their Giovanni, there are some people that love their Cappadocians, and the wonderful thing is you can still play them as part of the Hecata or separate from the Hecata in V5, because they exist too. So yeah, that's my decision for now. Ask me tomorrow and I'll probably say the Ravnos.
We'll cover more about the Hecata when we get into Cults of the Blood God, yeah. But let's go ahead and talk about when we didn't talk about Clan La Sombra, which is a very big feature here in Chicago by Night.
Yes. So the initial plan, going way back into when I was working on the V5 core and Camarilla and Anarch, was how many clans are we going to put in the core? Mm-hmm. And I know this is a question that, or there's an answer of some consternation, I guess, among some fans. Why didn't you just put all clans in the core book? And for a while, we were considering it. Believe me, it was a consideration. The main reason we chose not to, in fact, there were a couple. One, simply a question of space. Two, is the question of context. So all of the clans outside of the Big Seven and the Thinbloods and Kaitif have occupy a strange place in the Vampire the Masquerade mythos or meta plot. They're either attached to the Sabbat, or they're so wrapped up in their own independent struggles and their own independent mythology that presenting them as a standard clan without a bit of history, without a bit of flavor around them, would make them perhaps confusing to a new player, I think is fair to say. Or at least they wouldn't be presenting them in the way that they deserve. Is probably a better way of putting it. And so we put the Banu Hakim in the Camarilla book because their big meta plot arc for V5 is they've just joined the Camarilla as a new clan. They are now the judges of the Camarilla. They're often the sheriffs of the Camarilla. The Ministry, formerly the followers of Set, have joined the Anarchs, largely because of actions perpetrated against them by probably the Banu Hakim, maybe the Toreador, maybe even other members of the Ministry. But they joined the Anarch movement. And so that was the book they were situated in. And then we got to the La Sombra. Now, for a while, again, the La Sombra could have appeared in the core, but we wanted to offer a playable option in Chicago by Night. That was one important thing. And we also wanted justification for what we had planned for the La Sombra meta plot beat, which was part of that clan was starting to migrate into the Camarilla structure. Mm-hmm. And we thought Chicago could be a fantastic staging ground for this. Not only does it mean that we're presenting a city source book, but we're also presenting a city source book where something is happening, and that something is a new playable option is making itself available to you. That's from a very sort of, I guess, oversight level rather than a sort of entrenched level, but that's the sort of reasoning. And what that means is, oddly, at the time that the La Sombra were written for Chicago by Night, they have got more word count dedicated to them, their clan, their arc, their past, their motivations, than any other clan in V5. And then the Hecata, of course, come along, Cults of the Blood Gods, and get even more word count. So technically the Hecata have got more word count than any other clan in V5. So we wanted the La Sombra to move in parts of the Camarilla for a few reasons, but the main one was simply one of pragmatism. They were always a pragmatic clan. They were always seen as Darwinist, the strongest survive, but that doesn't mean they were going to blindly charge into the jaws of defeat over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why in Chicago by Night, you've got some La Sombra talking about how some of them participated in the Gehenna Crusade. They marched with a Sabbat. They went to devour Methuselahs and take down the antediluvians. And then they realized that the forces arrayed against them were far too powerful, that when their pack mates were devouring Methuselahs, those pack mates were then sort of standing up, eyes glowing, and going after the rest of the Sabbat. It was a massacre. And so the La Sombra, some of the La Sombra decided, you know what? This experiment has failed, and we're not going down with the ship. It's time to go cap in hand to the Camarilla, which must have been very difficult because they're a very proud, maybe arrogant clan. But where the Ventrue are all about rule and order, the La Sombra are about victory. That is the defining difference. The Ventrue want to rule, the La Sombra want to win.
Yeah.
And the La Sombra realize they cannot win if they stay part of the Sabbats, at least some of them. It's about, I see it as a 50-50 split. But a significant enough number start appearing in Camarilla cities with cap in hand, going to princes, saying, we want to join the Ivory Tower. What would you demand of us? And so you have an example put in Chicago by Night where Kevin Jackson says, yeah, we'll let you stay in our domain if you hand over an elder of your clan, or worse, that effect. With the idea being that if everyone in the clan followed this, the clan would pretty much eliminate itself, or would very nearly eliminate the powerful members of the clan, which means the Camarilla would then be able to drive the heel down into any surviving La Sombra. And some La Sombra work around and say, what about an elder in the Sabbat? What about just any elder? I mean, who's going to know? Who is going to know who this person with a stake through them is, or who this ash belongs to? And the La Sombra aren't stupid. They're not going to weaken themselves utterly. They will play the game that they have to put themselves in an advantageous position ultimately. They've got all the time in the world, just like every other clan. And so you have these migrants, these refugees from the Sabbat, showing up in Camarilla domains, pledging to do whatever is necessary. And then when they go off to do whatever is necessary, they tweak it so that they aren't cutting their own throats just to survive another night. Which I think is very La Sombra. It speaks to their lack of moral fiber, one could say.
I like that
distinction.
distinction.
I don't care, I'm not letting you win.
I do like that distinction. Do you want to be right or do you want to win?
That's
how it breaks down between the La Sombra and the Ventrue. Did we have a question in the chat that we missed, Stacey?
Not that I could see, but I do have another question about clans.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Are there any plans? You obviously mentioned at one point there was plans to add potentially all of them, and then you kind of went, that's a lot, and we keep writing more for every single one we add. A particular clan I've been asked is, are there any plans to add the Barley?
Not at this time, to my knowledge. None of the V5 books that I am developing have got the Barley in. We do have Infernalists in the upcoming Forbidden Religions. So you will see the DNA of the Barley in there, I think. But I think for as long as V5 is focused on the street level above the, I guess, more meta plot entrenched level of the game, the Barley are probably going to be quite distant. I know that the main issue is how the Barley have been presented at times in the past, and that is, and it's kind of demonstrated through their art in the revised Storyteller's Handbook, where you have a guy with a goatee, a pair of shades on, a rat crawling over his shoe. It's all very very distinctive, very memorable, and he looks like the devil about to offer you a deal. That there's no subtlety to that horror. And when you start introducing vampires like that, who are literally worshipping infernal demons that live literally in the ground, all of a sudden, elders, Methuselahs, the Camarilla, the circulatory system, the horror that they apply to a game is nothing, because it's completely overshadowed by the Barley and Moloch and Nurgle and all that. That's not to say I don't like them. I use them a lot in Dark Ages games, but I don't think they will be appearing in V5 anytime soon. At least, again, not in any books that I'm developing. Doesn't mean never, but probably not this year.
For this particular context, it doesn't make sense to sort of get them in. No, I get you.
No.
We've asked your favorite clan. What's your favorite bloodline then?
The Kia Seed. Ooh, actually, I you know what? I said that so quickly, I'll stick with it.
Okay.
I think it's supposed to be Kia Sheed, but it sounds a bit Sean Connery like.
Kia Sheed.
Kia Sheed.
Kia Sheed.
Kia Sheed McLeod. In the past, I would have said the Harbingers of Skulls, and I think I did what I needed to do with the Harbingers to make them a clan rather than a bloodline now that they're part of the Hecata. So that leaves the Kia Seed, who I wrote up in Lore of the Bloodlines for V20 in an effort to make them interesting and playable. The one thing I dislike about some of the revised edition books, and bearing in mind it was revised edition that really got me into Vampire, so it isn't a strong complaint, but sometimes there are sidebars in those books that say you really shouldn't be playing this vampire. This is for the storyteller only. And the Kia Seed had that. They said, if you want to play a vampire that stays in the library for 500 years, fill your boots kind of thing. And that never really appealed to me. I thought, well, that's fine, but I can think of ways of making eldritch fey vampires scary and a part of the fabric of vampire. And so in Lore of the Bloodlines for V20, I cover how the Kia Seed have lots of these facets, like, for instance, some of them favor drinking from the vessels using silver straws. They like to puncture the skin of their victims because they find the skin carries germs. The skin is dirty. They don't want to penetrate the skin with their fangs. They will suck from them like mosquitoes. You've got others, because they are a blood mutation themselves, they're interested in alchemy. This is before the Thin Bloods had blood alchemy, of course. And so you've got essentially mixologists and sommeliers among the Kia Seed who are mixing fey blood with Toreador blood to make an interesting cocktail, and let's see how that has an effect on your system. And what kind of vampire does that make you? And I went into all of this effort because I wanted them to seem more than just vampire archivists. Now they're also vampire archaeologists of the Indiana Jones variety, except they look like freaks.
Yeah.
They want to delve into tombs and find the most forbidden knowledge, because they are the clan that has experimented widely with forbidden knowledge, hence why they are who they are. So yeah, I love the Kia Seed, and I really hope they make an appearance in V5 at some point, and I hope that it's me that writes them.
Well, I hope so too. One of the things I did want to talk about, La Sombra, that's been my favorite thing. It keeps coming up over and over again in our Sunday game, is their clan flaw and how that's changed from previous editions. And we have a La Sombra in our game, and we just keep throwing technology at her just to watch it fail.
Oh god, that was the worst. My Markavian is heavily tech inspired. She loves her tech van. Well, rest in peace, tech van. It's gone now. But she loves her tech. She's a hacker, and so she doesn't leave her van though. She has severe agoraphobia. She will not get out of her van. So she handed a USB stick. Go put this in the camera. They handed it to the La Sombra. And I can't see the La Sombra on the camera. I can't
Yeah.
hear her talk. And I don't know where my USB stick is.
No.
All I see is floating paintings across the corridors.
I can see how that might trouble a Malkavian or anyone. So yeah, we changed the La Sombra Bane or floor, largely because it was probably the least utilized floor in previous editions. One of them, the fact that most places aren't covered with mirrors. And if your floor only manifests as not appearing on cameras, then it's something of an advantage in an age where Inquisition is looking for you. Plus, and some people try and justify it as well as being their weakness since the Dark Ages games, and that's true. But it was used even less there. I think the example in Dark Ages is you do not cast a reflection in a pool of water. How many pools of water are you standing next to for someone to notice that you're casting their reflection? In short, it was a flawed floor. It was very thematically appropriate, but in practice it had issues. And so we decided to play around with the idea that instead of just having them cast no reflection, that they are kind of half not here. They have tapped into something, the Abyss, Oblivion, that is wholly unnatural, so that when they were embraced, they are in part void. They are absent, they are dead. It's as if they half don't exist. Now, how that manifests on technology is distortion. If your Bane is, your severity is low enough, you might show up. But otherwise, you're going to start looking like a black blot on the screen or static. Technology doesn't register your presence because technically you are not present. You're trying to walk through two automated doors, but it doesn't see you, or it doesn't recognize you as a human being. Now,
somebody just brought that up, that their La Sombra has a trouble with interacting with the doors.
So a lot of people who, when they first saw that, some people loved it, some people hated it, of course. I'm used to that. It's a new edition. People will always hate new things, and that's fine. But some people just thought it was silly, and that it could only be played for laughs, and it rendered La Sombra utterly useless. Somebody said, well, how am I supposed to use a mobile phone? How am I supposed to drive a car? My character can't do half the things other modern kindred do. To which I say, good.
Yeah.
The La Sombra are a clan focused around domination. If your La Sombra doesn't have a retainer to drive you places, a retainer to make calls for you, a retainer to open doors for you, what kind of grandstanding La Sombra in the Camarilla are you? Because everyone pictures La Sombra as black hair, black suit, black, but of course, incredibly pale skin. And yes.
Are we just describing me here? Am I La Sombra? Please continue.
Apparently so. And so they look cool, they look edgy, they look gothic, but they are also domineering bullies who will push people around and get mortals to do everything for them, and they're not going to admit the reason why. They're not going to say, well, it's because the doors won't open for me. They'll say, well, because I like my bodyguard to walk ahead and make sure there aren't any booby traps on the other side of the door. Or, well, I'm not handling a phone. I get my secretary to make calls for me. I have a chauffeur for driving me to Elysium. Because the La Sombra isn't going to say, when I try and turn the key, the engine stops. and I've seen people play around with the harshness of the Bane, and honestly, I'm fine with people adjusting it. It's not my place to say what you should do to have fun or not. And if you want it to be that La Sombra have no effect on mechanical workings, then great. Have them drive around an old Cadillac. And maybe it's just that they can't work on cars that have an inbuilt computer. I don't know. You can tailor it to your tastes, but there is method to the madness.
I kind of like the idea of, a Dark Ages La Sombra who can't use technology, just being really mad that his cart won't go.
Well, that is the. I'll be honest. That is the loop we have not yet threaded, because if we ever do a Dark Ages game of V5, all of a sudden the Lasombra have got to have a new Bane again.
Can't get this printing press to work.
I
What
guess
was wrong with horses?
Yeah, well, yeah, horses just die underneath you now if you're a Lasombra.
There you go.
Mark that down, viewers. That's now the Lasombra Dark Ages play. Livestock dies around you.
I like that. No, one of the things I was reading when I first read the Lasombra Flaw, I was like, or the Bane, I was like, they can't play video games. So, like, then you get this mental image of this Lasombra elder demanding that their retainer play Tekken for them.
Yeah, and I'll watch from a distance. Because if I get close to the TV,
I want you to play this thing called Fortnite.
Play the Fortnite for me.
Beautiful, beautiful. Oh,
James, I wish to watch the Overwatch.
But from a distance again, because I can't watch a TV up close, because when I use the TV remote, it just...
Why do you have a drive-through cinema? No reason. He just looks over at the Lasombra.
I like that. A Lasombra with his personal drive-through cinema means he can watch everything at a distance.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, technically, yeah, a Lasombra cinephile would make a lot of sense, because you could sit at the back of the theatre and watch everything safely. Maybe you might affect the projector, so you'd probably get
to find
a middle seat.
Yeah, there's like a sweet spot. The Lasombra seats
on the aisle, obviously, in case the Second Inquisition show up as well.
Of course,
that's always where the premier seats are as well. They're just a little bit more expensive. I think Odeon's onto something there.
Yeah, they'd be well suited to premier seats, I think.
Oh yeah.
All right. Real quick, let's go ahead and touch on the Chicago Chronicles and the Sacrifice. What I really loved about those things in the Chicago Chronicles is that it really brought in the themes of Chicago, and it brought in the themes of what's happening in the game and the meta plot. So that was really cool for me. And I like that there were 4 to 5 story hooks per theme, and there were options for each one. So if you wanted to do, like, if you have a bunch of physical bruiser characters, there's something for them to do. If you have a bunch of socialites who just really love to talk and hang out and like, oh, I'm gonna convince these people to do things for me, then there's a way for them to do that. And even if you have the mental smart people, and then you have a way for the nerds to really nerd at things. And I love that. And that's a good segue into Let the Streets Run Red, which is almost entirely, I mean, it is a book of stories and stuff like that, and how cool those themes were about it. Let's go ahead and switch over to that. I loved Let the Streets Run Red. I loved it. I was reading through it, and I was like, oh, this is so fun. This is so cool. This is so creepy. And I really loved how the art captured those moods, and how, like, you can see in the art and in the instructions and in the stories for each theme how they captured these little unique universes. And again, you have maps again. I love maps. They're so cool. I loved that Power Prey had these connections for how the PCs tied into the story with their touchstones.
Yeah.
Because for me, I have a hard time working touchstones into a story, and it's cool to see that inbuilt to the game itself. I liked how it made you connect to your mortal past and your mortal self that way, and it dealt consequences if you tried to ignore that part of yourself. That was fun for me. In The Dying Fields, it felt like a Stephen King novel to me.
Oh, wonderful!
I loved it. I was like,
praise.
I was like, oh my god, my husband would love to play this. He hates vampire, and he would love this. I loved how it used scarcity, backgrounds and stuff like that. One of the things that I've seen in running these big campaigns is that people hate a plague storyline. They don't like blood diseases. But I like how it sort of answers, it creates the solution of a plague storyline where you have to deal with the scarcity of resources by taking the players out of their comfort zone and putting in somewhere that's creepy and weird, and you're having to struggle to maintain what you have with what's there. I loved that it had. I like the new rituals in there. That it made it. It was new content, so it's not just a story. It's actually new stuff that you can use for other games that you're putting out there. Innocence of Blood, love that. Love that. I love that I can take that book, that one story, give it to somebody who has never played Vampire before, and sort of give them a primer on the politics, how intercity and sect conflicts happen, how the enemies outside of vampires play into it. The lupines, for example, it was very moody and thematic, and it showed that there were two different vibes between Milwaukee and Gary. Yeah. And then the last one we did was Rest of Jungle, which was dealing with that human horror element with human trafficking, the Anarchs versus the Camarilla, and the territory wars, and all of that is really part of the thematic elements of Vampire. And I like that you get in Let the Streets Run Red, you get all of these different elements and these different stories. So that, I think, is a really good product for a new player, somebody who's never played Vampire before.
Again, I'm very, very glad you think so. Thank you very much for saying that, because Let the Streets Run Red is my favourite V5 book so far. And I think that surprises some people because it's not a major release. We didn't do a Kickstarter for Let the Streets Run Red. It's a stretch goal for Chicago. And it's, in theory, it's just a book with 4 playable stories in. It's got some ready-made characters, some lore sheets, some new powers, rituals, as you say. But at its heart, what it is a storybook. And yet it's my favorite because one of the biggest challenges you have as a developer or writer of Vampire the Masquerade is writing stories. It's easy to come up with a story. It's easy to run a story, in my opinion, for a group of players you know, especially when you know the characters they're going to play, their links, their mortal attachments, and so on. Coming up with something based on the players is easy. Coming up with something pre-written, so a pre-written scenario that players can attach their characters to without feeling like they are just being given a mission from someone on high, or feel like they're just walking into a prescribed scenario, is a massive challenge in Vampire. I often say that pre-written scenarios for D&D are, in my opinion, easy. Quest, kill, treasure. Call of Cthulhu, big fan of Call of Cthulhu, but the pre-written scenarios are easy structures. Investigate, encounter, run away, die, overcome. You know, it's it's an easy formula that, of course, has a lot of flexibility to it. But when your characters start off as agents with a mission, essentially, which in D&D, in Call of Cthulhu, and lots of other role-playing games you do, then it's easiest to write a scenario. And then you get Vampire the Masquerade. And Vampire the Masquerade kind of prides itself on all of the characters being personally driven. They are individuals first, coterie second, sect or clan third, maybe. And to write a scenario in advance and assume that it's going to match that personal drive and the coterie drive is bloody hard, I'll be honest. And so it doesn't surprise me when people read Let the Streets Run Red and might say, you know what, I love Power Prey because of the mortal stuff. I love the Dying Fields because of the sort of Children of the Corn vibe. Didn't get on with Innocence in Blood because there was nothing my characters could latch onto. That makes perfect sense to me. However, I'm really proud of what the writers did in that book because I feel they gave sufficient links throughout these stories, not all necessarily in the introductions, though Power Prey is very heavy on the introductory element, as you pointed out, so that players with their storyteller should be able to find bonds with characters within characters, plot beats in each story. And I think that's a big challenge to overcome, because Vampire the Masquerade often gets criticized. Old editions often got criticized for their chronicles, things like the Transylvania Chronicles, a lot of the Chicago Chronicles of old, in that player characters had no agency. They were always observers to something major going on. We didn't want that in V5. We want the player characters to be front and center at all times. This is their story. And so the fact that we managed to achieve that, even on some level, with Let the Streets Run Red, makes me very proud of the writers, very proud of the book, the artists, everyone else involved on it. And it pleases me to no end to know that you enjoyed it as well, and I hope other people do too.
I thought it was great. I really enjoyed that it added new mechanical elements too. I loved at the beginning you had the general difficulties rule, so if you are really good at something, your player character's really good at something, they actually have a reduced difficulty when they're dealing with an SPC. And so that was really cool to me. I loved that. I loved that the biographies of these characters that we saw were so cool. Like, these are cool people. like I want to hang out with these people, even though they're like horrible monsters that do human trafficking and eat people and are cultists, and that's weird. But I still want to hang out with them because they seem cool. Like
I'm sure they're fine down the pub.
Yeah, it'll be great. What I really liked is that one of the special things I really loved was in the pre-made characters, the SPCs, that Nosferatu character you did with the one half of her face is really beautiful, and then the other half of her face is horrifying.
Oh yeah, Gabriella.
Yeah. We're so used to the idea of Nosferatu from previous editions being ugly, like you're a horrible monster ugly, and it's really cool. We saw this with Let the Streets Run Red. We saw it again in later content, that a Nosferatu can be beautiful and still inhumanly creepy and weird. And I love that. I love weird things. I like it when something is cool in a way that's really unexpected. So that was really fun for me. And
that was one of the things I liked about the Cleopatra lore sheet that's recently is that in the Chicago?
That's in Children of the Blood, the Cleopatra. Yeah.
We'll get to that.
I loved that. Yeah. I loved that.
Yeah.
Okay, are we going to talk about that later?
We will talk about that later.
I can wait. I'll talk about how much I love that in a minute.
We'll put a pin in that. We'll talk about that later because it is super cool. One of the things I also loved about lore sheets is you updated them for a modern time. So you have the social media influencer lore sheet, which is absolutely a thing that's happening. It really ties into what it is we're doing. So that's really cool. And it makes it feel like a modern game. That can be the issue with Vampire, is it feels outdated and old, especially if you're dealing with if you're still people who are fans of the revised edition and the old 1990s. That's when I started. I played my first Vampire game in 1999, so I mean, here I am dating myself.
No, it's probably the same time for me.
Yeah, but it feels fresh, it feels modern, it feels updated, and it feels like it reflects the changes of the world that we're in. So that for me is really cool. I love that. I think we had some questions, actually. Or do you have something?
I was just going to say lore sheets. So I think it was Kenneth Haidt on the V5 core who suggested we use lore sheets. They're a mechanic that originated in a game called Weapons of the Gods, not related to Vampire, but they exist as a way of tying characters into meta plot at their broadest sense. But you are completely right. There is an archaic feeling to a lot of Vampire, and especially with the lore sheets by design. And what I found was a lot of new players weren't picking them up. They satisfied a lot of established fans of the meta plot because this allows me to be a descendant of this vampire I read about 20 years ago. Great. I feel like I'm linked to everything, which is the point. But other people would read it and think I have no idea what this is talking about, so I'm not going to touch it. Mm-hmm. So in later books, when you see things like social media influencer, some people won't use it, and that's fine. Other people will use that as their connection to the vampire world. So I think it's nice to have a bit of both.
Yeah, I think so.
Great. I've managed to find the question, because sometimes there's a question and I don't. I'm like, is that a conversation they're having, or is that a question?
Stop chatting in the chat. How dare you?
No chatting. That's not allowed. I get confused. No, I'm kidding. Please continue. The question that I've got here is, I'd love to hear what Matthew thought of with the updates of Gary's NPCs. Could he say why he took some of them in the direction he did, like Evelyn, Alicia, and Modius?
I can almost guess who may have asked that question, but if it's who I think it is, hello. So the main issue with Gary, not really an issue, I guess the main theme of Gary was stagnation in its original iteration, and every other time it's really been picked up in Vampire. And we could have played to that. Definitely, we could have continued with the theme of everything in Gary is disgusting and sour. But I think the best thing that we could have done, to my tastes, and what we attempted to do, was say that the establishment has stagnated. They've stagnated to the point of now being torpid. There is no hope for a Gary under the cosh of Modius or Juggler or the Old Guard. And as with Critias, in a way, once your sires, once the people holding your chains start to disappear, you can start finding your own path. You have characters like Alicia and Evelyn, who were very much tools, resentful at times of their masters in previous editions. And now they can be their own people, and they turn out to be a lot more effective than the people they are replacing, because they have been able to see things from both sides. They probably don't agree on a whole hell of a lot, except for the fact that they're not going to be someone else's puppet anymore. And I think that comes through in both of those characters. Gary, as a city, has changed significantly since the early 90s. It isn't a desolate ruin anymore. There are parts of it that are by no means prosperous, but you could say that for many a city, especially in the Midwest or the Rust Belt or what have you. But I think as the city changes, so should the vampires. And eventually you do have to say that the Deadwood characters like Modius are holding the domain back, and there will be internal forces like Alicia and Evelyn who acknowledge this and try and do something about this, and there'll be external forces as the main, I guess, antagonist power behind the curtain in Rusted Jungle. They come in from external and think, you know what, the person in my way here is nothing. He is a paper tiger. He's been holding a crown on his head for who knows how long, simply because no one has challenged him. Let's sweep this domain clean and make something good of it, or at the very least, turn it into a staging ground so that we can attack Chicago and use this place as a safe harbor to retreat to. So, yeah. That was the reasoning behind the character changes and the setting change.
Well, CT Phipps 1990 does indeed say, yes, you know who I am, and I've broken the masquerade.
Yes, I know, CT. You love your Gary.
And they've got another question. Does Matthew prefer Milwaukee or Indianapolis as his preferred sort of domain? Is Mark Decker the best prince or the best prince?
So this goes into this goes into Let the Streets Run Red and the Innocence in Blood story, because you have Milwaukee and Indianapolis presented as kind of polar opposites on the Kindred Society scale, or the Midwest and Kindred Society scale, where Milwaukee is the perfect domain to be immortal in theory in the world of darkness, because the prince is such a tyrant, so tight-fisted, so punishing, that the Second Inquisition have never had to visit, because all of the vampires, most of the vampires, abide by the masquerade, and no one would risk breaching it for fear of what Mark Decker and his judges and the executioner would do. However, it's a pretty soul-destroying place to be a vampire as a result. You are basically treated as a monster. Mark Decker makes no illusion over the fact that you are all undead and you're going to have to learn to behave like controlled undead. You're not going to pretend to be human because you're not, but you are not going to just go around tearing heads off, opening throats, that kind of thing, or pretending otherwise. So on one hand, it's the ideal domain. On the other, it's the worst domain to be a vampire. Compared to Indianapolis, which is under the control of the Ministry as the new Anarch clan and their various philosophies, Indianapolis was an interesting choice. We wanted to go for Indianapolis largely because it hadn't been covered before. Also because we've never seen a Ministry-run domain in Vampire the Masquerade before, or Followers of Set run domain for that matter. And we wanted to see what would happen if you exposed a domain of vampires to a bombardment of faith. Faith above reason, one could argue. Or freedom through belief. Because it's still an anarch cause. The Ministry are basically saying, you can free yourself from the chains of the elders, you can free yourself from the laws of the Camarilla, you can free yourself from all the things holding you back if you do what we say, which is pretty much the credo of most cults out there. And the Ministry are no exception. The problem is the speakers for the Ministry are a range of true believers and incompetents. Some of them will just lead you down the path to absolute destruction. Some of them will maybe give you an ounce of enlightenment. Others are fighting among themselves. So it's not by no means a utopia. But the Ministry sees it as a utopia because the ministers, the vampires who actually survived to become ministers, are, well, they think they are enlightened by dint of the fact they survived. They drove people down to the point where you might have humanity won. They made you cut off your touchstones. They made you divest yourself of your wealth and your contacts and allies. And if you can build yourself back up from that, then congratulations, welcome to the Ministry. Here's your membership. If you can't, well, you were never going to make it anyway, and you're not our problem anymore. Off you go. So the fact that the ministers in charge of Indianapolis survived proves in their mind that they deserved it, that they are enlightened. Now, the problem is you've got a hell of a lot of vampires in Indianapolis that didn't make it. They are whites. They are, at this point, feral. And they are great dangers to humanity. And the Camarilla is looking very closely at Indianapolis, but more dangerously, the Second Inquisition are looking at Indianapolis because of all these mortal deaths. So, to get to the point, Milwaukee, heaven for mortals, hell for vampires. Indianapolis, maybe utopia for vampires, terrifying for mortals.
Terrible place to be alive.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people in Indiana would say that about their entire state. But I mean, well, there's part of the reason we wanted it to be Indianapolis is because there is a strong evangelicals circle around Indianapolis. A lot of the communities, not necessarily in the city itself, but in the towns and smaller communities, have a very strong Baptist or evangelical bent to them. And so we felt like this could be channeled through the Ministry in Indianapolis. They kind of bring that evangelism into the heart of the city. So in short, is Mark Decker is he the best prince? He's the best prince for the job in Milwaukee, because Milwaukee is still beset by lupines. It is still, the Second Inquisition are present, but they're not looking at his domain. So he's clearly doing something right. The problem is he is also pretty much unrepentantly monstrous and prepared to do whatever he has to keep his domain secure. And he will always use that as justification for increasingly horrific acts. So yeah, best vampire for the job, but by no means the best prince. I would probably rather be in Chicago if I were a vampire. I wouldn't want to be in Indianapolis or Milwaukee.
Speaking of the ministry, Stacey, didn't you have a question that you wanted to ask about our stream?
Oh, yes. Because obviously you're a big fan of our stream. We do have a ministry. We have the Sombra. We've got me as a Malkavian. Got lots of. So who is your favorite of our characters?
Well, my favorite character is Ricky because he shows a lot of heart, and there's, even despite all the horrible things that he has done, intentionally or not, often intentionally, whether he deludes himself to the contrary or otherwise, I can see that his heart is in the right place. The problem with ministers is that heart is often in a canopic jar buried in a desert somewhere, and that's maybe a career prospect for Ricky if someone else doesn't stick a stake through his heart first. But yeah, he won me over.
He won you over. Yeah. World class
hero. He said he's doing his best. And he was in a box for so long.
World-class hero, Ricky Dorada.
World-class hero, Ricky Dorada.
I would like to take a very short break to get more water, if that's okay with you guys. And then we can come back and talk about Cults of the Blood God. And potentially we can talk about Cleopatra's too. So we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back, and then we'll do a giveaway, and then we'll talk some more. All right? So see you in a few minutes.
everybody. I'm George.
And I'm Bob. We're the Shipping Goblins from Beetle and Grips. Today, we're going to talk about the amazing Map Vault Collection. And with the Map Vault Collection, you get a bunch of gorgeous two-sided maps, all scaled for standard minis.
Yeah, get yours now for the Map Vault Collection from Beetle and Grim, and all the players at your table will be revved up and hyper because the only thing they'll be able to say is...
Yeah, go ahead and do it.
Zoinks!
No, do it again.
Zoinks!
Hello?
Who do you think you are?
Yes, Mr. Lillard.
You're just some color.
Yes, sir.
You can't just go off and use my
It's your
voice
thing.
like that. I have rights.
Completely. We just thought...
Wait,
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna take this right to
yes, sir.
Beetle. Hey, Grim.
Thank you, sir.
What happened?
Matthew Lillard watches our show!
I like that one.
Okay, hold on. And we're back, and we're in the wrong screen. So let's go back here. Here we are. Now we're back. Hello. Thank you for staying with us. We appreciate your time. We're gonna go ahead and do a giveaway. Thanks to the courtesy of ONYX Path, and so thank you for sticking around. So our giveaway is a trivia question. Do you want to go ahead and ask your trivia question, Matthew?
Yes, for people who have been long-term fans of Vampire the Masquerade, I'm sure this one will be easy, but to others, maybe not. The question is, who was the Prince of Chicago before Loden?
And if you answer this question correctly, you will get a copy of all three of the books that we have out tonight, Cult of the Blood Gods, Let the Streets Run Red, and Chicago by Night. So that'll be fun. So if you have an answer to that trivia question, go ahead and write it in the chat. And as soon as we see the correct answer, we will let you know. And you can go ahead and collect your prize. So until we get
Jairus just PM'd me that the answer is Ricky Dorada.
Unfortunately, no. Ricky Dorada was not.
That means you need to donate those 3 books now for giving that answer.
Oh,
Okay, Jairus, you need to donate those. Just pass that buck.
Let's go ahead and while we're waiting for the answer, let's talk about Cult of the Blood Gods. I loved this. I mean, and not in an unironic way. I loved it because you took something that was really a big part of the previous editions, the paths, the roads, and then you made it into something new, and you brought back that religious element. So it's not just about are we human anymore, because we've answered that we're not human. Are we trying to be human? Maybe, but also what does religion look like after you've been alive for so long, and what happens with these religious ideas when you have people like Mithras. I love Mithras, and I love how that was handled in the book. That was really cool. So I liked the idea of religion in the context of vampire, and how different faiths are experienced differently depending on the individual. And I also really liked that there was this perspective of the Duskblood too, because a lot of times in the previous editions, in Revised and 20th edition, we mentioned the Caitiff, we mentioned the Thin Bloods, and it's just sort of like oh yeah, they're there, and maybe they bring about the end times, but we don't really focus on their perspective. They are an antagonist, or an element of the story, but here they are part of the story. They are the story itself, and I loved that. That was really cool to me. So how did that come about by including those perspectives?
Cult of the Blood Gods was a product I pitched out of love for a Forgotten Realms product for AD&D 2nd edition called Faiths and Avatars. Faiths and Avatars was a book that covered all the gods of the Forgotten Realms, the various religions. And I loved it. It's a fantastic book. It's still a fantastic book. Tiny print, and just every single word is incredibly readable, just full of story hooks. And I love story hooks. I love utility in a role-playing game source book. And I think most people who've ever heard me speak before know that my design philosophy is utility. In every paragraph, there has to be something usable. Now, Cults of the Blood Gods came about as a result of my love for that book, because I was aware that we hadn't really covered ecclesiastical horror, if you want to call it that, religious horror, in a terribly deep and meaningful way in previous editions. We have, of course, had the Sabbat, which is a cult all on its own with its paths of enlightenment. We had the followers of Set, who of course worshipped Set. You had allusions to vampires worshipping Methuselahs here and there. You had Urshulgi and so on. You had bits and pieces, but the only books that really covered religious horror as a focus were a book called State of Grace for Revised, which not many people read, and the Cainite Heresy for Dark Ages, which more people read. And so I thought it was time to put religion as one of the pillars of V5, as one of the horror pillars. And for me, I feel like religion is a completely natural course for vampires to adopt. It has to be a certain level of acceptance from a vampire who reaches a certain age that they are supernatural in nature. And that shouldn't automatically mean that they gravitate toward the Abrahamic mythos of Cain and Abel, and Cain being the progenitor. It shouldn't even mean they think of themselves, even if they believe that, they shouldn't necessarily consider themselves cursed murderers, or that it's the Christian or Jewish or Muslim God up above who is making them do everything that they are doing, because not everyone is of one of the Abrahamic religions. And when you have literal gods walking among you, talking to you, dominating you, giving you the gifts of their vitae, you can see these vampires. You can go to their courts. You can go to their Elysia. You can trace your ancestry to them through the vitae. Then the worship surrounding these characters in an effort to either gain from their benevolence or stave off their malevolence, if you like, or utilize them as weapons, makes perfect sense to me. I think there's a cynical element to it, in that, well, everyone else has abandoned me, so time to adopt religion. I mean, that's the sort of born again idea that a lot of people hold, that you become a born again Christian, and I'm sure this isn't the case for all of them. I'm not going to make some grand sweeping statement, but there is a belief that you become a born again Christian when you have pissed off everyone else in your life, or everyone else in your life has abandoned you. So it's time to find God. And in the case of vampires, you have lost everyone. You've lost every connection. You don't have a job. You don't have friends. You don't have a relationship. You don't have a family, at least nothing that could be considered healthy. So it's time to find a purpose. Well, the good news is there's a vampire in Elysium who has a flyer that says, come to my session at the Alcoholics Anonymous hut on Friday night, and we'll talk about your problems, and maybe I can give you some answers. And I think that cult aspect is really... It feels like it should have been stronger in Vampire from the start, to my mind. Other people's mileage may vary. When I look at TV shows like... there's a fantastic TV show, not enough people watched it when it was on, and it's a complete TV series of 3 seasons called The Leftovers. It's brilliant. In my mind, one of the most fantastic TV shows ever made. And there's in The Leftovers, this isn't spoiling anything, there's an event that occurs at the beginning of the first episode where 2% of the world's population just disappear, raptured, or something has happened. There's never an explanation for it. It isn't a story about explanations. It's a story about the people left behind and how they cope with it psychologically, or how it affects them and traumatizes them. Now we jump ahead a few years in The Leftovers to see what our characters are up to. And this is all in the first episode, and it follows from that point on. And one of the interesting groups in The Leftovers is a cult known as the Guilty Remnant. And the Guilty Remnant exist to remind everyone of everyone that's disappeared. Mm-hmm. They exist to remind you that your time is coming soon, our time is coming soon. This isn't the only time this is going to happen. They are a nihilistic cult. They chain smoke, they say nothing, they just stare at you. They are living reminders of everyone who disappeared. Mm-hmm. And the reason people join the Guilty Remnant, which seems like such a foreign concept, becomes apparent throughout the show, that no one can grieve. No one can grieve the people that have gone, because we don't know whether they're dead. We don't know if they'll ever come back. No one can move on. No one can remarry. No one can be at peace with the fact that these people have just vanished and our lives have been irrevocably changed. Mm-hmm. And when you are presented with no answers, you make answers. Mm-hmm. You fill the gap yourself with something that either seems comforting or sensible. And I take something like that and I look at vampire and I think, I have just been made a vampire. I can't go out in the sun anymore. I can no longer, I don't know, father children. I can no longer express my love naturally to my partner. I can no longer, there's all kinds of things I can no longer do. Mm-hmm. And I could end it all. I could greet the sun. I could take part in the Machiavellian schemes of the court just to fill my night with something. I could take up a job as a prince's hound, which sounds utterly dismal. Or I could find meaning and commit myself to something that actually makes me feel like I have a purpose and this happened for a reason. Mm-hmm. And so that's a very long-winded explanation, but I'm full of those, as people know. This is why I don't do elevator pitches unless it's like a Sears Tower kind of elevator, Hancock Tower.
That's Chicago by night. Sorry.
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, in short, I think cults, as they appear in Cults of the Blood Gods, are something that should have always existed in Vampire, and I think they fit in naturally. And the response the book has received from people is so positive. People love this element of Vampire the Masquerade, and that is intensely gratifying to me and everyone else who worked on it.
I think it's a great update on something that existed already, but needed to be refreshed for the new system, for a more modern context. I love that you made callbacks to older lores and you added new things in. I love that we got more detail on the Bahari, which is my favorite thing ever,
They are the most confused cult in every prior edition. Mm-hmm. Because you have sometimes the Bahari are presented as masochists, sometimes they're presented as man-haters, sometimes they're presented as Lilith worshippers, sometimes they're presented as all manner of things. And I think that we did a very good job, all credit to the writers on this, of presenting the Bahari in a way that made sense for vampires, because there's a strong theme of change and rebirth within that particular cult and self-empowerment. There is still a feminist theme. You don't have to be a woman to be in the Bahari, but there's an empowerment theme without making them the good guys. They still do absolutely horrible things.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that was a challenge with some of the cults, because religions, of course, always see themselves, as any philosophical or political movement sees itself, as the right thing. Mm-hmm. And so if you're going around just being a monster every night of the week, you may struggle to maintain that worldview unless you're completely deranged. And so the Bahari do have elements of light to their philosophy. And we had to make sure that all these cults that had these elements of light also had lots of elements of dark, so that they weren't just the best damn cult on the block. Otherwise, everyone would join them.
Right.
So yeah, I'm very happy with how we addressed the Bahari and the Church of Set, the Mithraists, and the rest.
I love the Mithraists. Take a quick break because we actually do have a winner for our trivia question. Stacey, Ree, who won?
I hate that you've given me this username because I can't say it. But I think it's. I'm very sorry in advance. You will never know.
You will never know.
Oh, right. See, why didn't you just read it? You just let me embarrass myself.
I'm sorry. I didn't know you will never know. You will never know.
Will never know.
You will.
Yeah, you will never know. I see it now.
You see it now.
They answered with Maxwell.
And Maxwell is the answer. So yes, congratulations.
So, you will never know. Message one of our moderators. You can message Romeo Indigo Alpha, who's Indio Echo. Sorry, who's here, or you can message me, Ipsy the Unready, and we will pass your information on to the people at ONYX Path, and you will get your bundle of all 3 books: Calls to the Blood Gods, Chicago by Night, and Let the Streets Run Red. So this is cool. Excuse me. And we have a question, don't we? I saw your question.
Mm-hmm.
Stacey, Ree?
Do we? Oh, yes. Question. How did you come up with the... I'm going to say this badly as well. With the cult of Eligos. Eligos?
So the cult of Eligos and all of those other... Well, I don't know. I'm making up the pronunciation as well. It's a made-up word.
Say what I said and I feel good, okay?
Eligos. Eligos, I think.
Eligos?
I genuinely don't know. Because it was invented for this book. So that cult and the other cults in that particular chapter, which was... first of all, built around the idea of sort of mortal cults and minor groups who definitely won't exist in every single chronicle, was to take a sort of snapshot of the most unusual style of worship you might find, or the weirdest reasons for worship. And so you do have cults such as one that's being used as a front by the Second Inquisition. You do have a cult that is dedicated to a vampire that doesn't exist. You have a cult that is basically a almost a sort of polyamorous swinging set of blood drinkers. They are very much an acquired taste. I say that there's sometimes I receive a lot more, I guess, surprised positivity regarding Eligos, Nigel, and some of those others, and the cult with the crawling tongue, which is in Chicago Folios, than I probably do about the Mithraists and some of the other major ones. But I think it's because they're a novelty. I think, however, those cults are perfect to act as antagonists for a short chronicle of 3 or 4 sessions. Or to have an unusual vampire show up in your story. And Eligos is probably my favorite one of those for that reason. You probably wouldn't revisit it over and over again. You would probably destroy it or run away from it or something along those lines after you have found out the truth behind it.
Yes.
But that was written entirely by Emily Griggs, I think, the author of that chapter. Do forgive me if that wasn't Emily.
And we're really sorry
I'm speaking into the atmosphere here because I'm sure the author probably isn't watching, but they might be, and they might watch later.
If they do in fact find this, we're sorry if we butchered your name. For all we know, Eligos is a deeply loved relative or pet. I don't know. Emily's there screaming at us, going, "It's pronounced!"
But yeah, all those strange groups were invented by a single author and not outlined by me. Whereas in the bulk of the Kindred Religions chapter, all of the things like the Church of Set, Bahari, etc., that was all laid down pretty specifically by myself or came out through meetings with the writers, whereas the minor cults and the mortal cults, so the weird religions, were all invented and submitted to me by one of the writers on the book, and I thought, yep, we'll be keeping them. They make for a fantastic counterpoint to the more organized religions in the previous chapter.
One of the things I absolutely loved is like the build your own cult chart. Like, so you can you can go down the list, and then you can find like, I'm gonna be the daughters of the dancing snake. Like, cool, that's my cult. We're dancing snakes. That's awesome. And our themes are snakes and smoke and lightning, or whatever, dancing.
All of a sudden, you're the followers of Set.
Yeah.
Circa revised edition.
Yeah, but but also you're Bahari, and also you're dancing. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's cool.
It's a lot of fun.
That cult construction chapter was by Jacqueline Brick, if I recall. And she did a marvelous job. She's always fantastic at writing conscientious material that basically says to the reader, this is going to be dealing with some rather horrifying stuff, so make sure you check what you are happy to read. And it goes into the process of what one goes through when joining a cult, forming a cult, living within a cult. And I'm really, really happy with that. There was some good material in there from both Jax and Lillian Cohen Moore both wrote some really strong cults as an element material, rather than this is what the Setites are like, or this is what the Hecata is like.
Looks like we have some questions.
Yeah, we do. Bringer of Oranges. I managed to say that one. Thank you, Bringer of Oranges.
Bringer of Oranges. Yeah.
I nearly did, honestly. You've ruined it for me, Oranges. Will the
Shogi?
Thank you. Cult be included in the Forbidden Religions? Can you tell us any details?
They will be. However, I can't tell you many details simply because that book still needs to have its sort of final layout approved by Paradox, and I don't want to confirm something that may end up getting cut. But I will say that it's, to my mind, the worst of the Banu Hakim. And I say that as I don't play a Banu Hakim right now, and I'm sure there's plenty of Banu Hakim that love worshipping Ur-Shulgi, or at least they certainly try to believe that. But yeah, Ur-Shulgi is an awful blood-hungry monster. It's a massive leech inside a mountain that may or may not even be active at this point. The idea that it may have sloped off towards Hakim, wherever he might be, is also frightening because you wouldn't want to cross his path on the motorway. But yeah, Ur-Shulgi's cult is definitely in the book and is pretty nasty. There are some cults in Forbidden Religions, I will say, that, contrary to what I was saying earlier about the Kia Seed, are more strongly tailored to SPCs. There's certainly the possibility that you might form a game around playing, if all of you play members of this cult, that makes a lot of sense. But some of them are so homicidal or fanatical by nature that if you had one person in that cult and everyone else in the coterie wasn't, it may create some rather violent friction.
Yeah.
Fair. We've got your favourite person, CT Phipps, coming back at you with, are the Nephilim or Cult of Helena more frou-frou a rarity pony Toreador? Asking for a friend.
Well, that's a colourful way of asking a question, Charles.
That's exactly what they've said.
I'm probably the Cult of Helena, because the Nephilim aren't by definitional Toreador. They worship the Trinity and Michael, and the most powerful members of the Nephilim are his descendants. But there are other Nephilim who are not. And so while they do certainly worship the concept of beauty being a physical manifestation of I guess glory and faith and purity, that kind of thing, they have beliefs beyond that. The sons and daughters of Helena are more one note. They don't think they are, but given that they are all being duped into this cult, they aren't actually the sons and daughters of Helena. Helena doesn't really know anything about this group either. But is quite content right now to entertain the possibility that it exists and it could be useful one day. These are the Frou Toreador mentioned, I suppose, because if that's really the best they've got going for them, then they don't have long for these nights.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying fair.
Fair, yeah. It is fair. Yeah. I mean, if you're a cult of Helena, you had to be a Toreador. Let's go ahead and talk about the one issue of this book that everyone keeps coming back to, in the Hecata. That we keep meaning to come back to. So let's talk about Hecata. I love what happened, because there were so many necromancers and so many different.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Okay, and this guy has necromancy, and that guy everyone has necromancy. Well, let's just all hang out now, because we kind of gotta, because we kind of got murdered. So
you like bones, and I like bones.
Yeah.
We all like.
Let's all like bones together.
Let's all like bones together, and yeah, let's try not to get murdered more than we already have been. So I loved that they got new coterie types. That you really did create a whole new lore around that coterie. There's the new coterie types. There's the new predator types.
Yep.
There's the whole history of the disparate groups of the Hecata and how they came together. And I like the even you mentioned that you can still be a harbinger of the skull.
And you could still be a Giovanni who doesn't believe in the Hecata plan. Right. It's just a catch-all clan name that, or a banner that they have, or a plaque in front of the door, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think we mentioned in this book that, of course, Hecata isn't our original clan name. Giovanni wasn't our original clan name. Cappadocians weren't our original clan name. So what are you objecting so vehemently about that we have changed, that we've rebranded for the first time in 500 years? So yeah, I think I mentioned the Hecata are my favorite clan right now.
Right.
I think they are among my proudest accomplishments for V5. I wrote the Hecata in this book with the Hecata history sort of section and their motivations with John Burke and Jacob Burgess. They each took a different sort of strand of the clan, and I wrote the rest of it and the sort of Hecata playable splats. So we call them splats, the usual sort of 1 to 4 pages of archetypes, disciplines, that kind of thing. And Bane. And until the companion book, V5 Companion, I'd written every single clan splat in V5. And it's quite a weight off my shoulders now that someone else has started doing it. It would have been nice to do all of them, but you don't always get what you want.
Right.
So some people have said it completely breaks my immersion to believe that the Harbingers of Skulls and the Cappadocians and the rest would suddenly buddy with the Giovanni. And I can understand that, the way that they were presented, and I always go back to Revised Edition, because Revised Edition was the most meta-plot heavy edition. Or at least it's solidified meta-plot in some rather forthright and sort of this is canon, and if you don't abide by it, you're not following canon anymore terms. And again, as a reader, I really enjoyed that. I like to have that codified. But as a player, I didn't enjoy the restrictions. Now, to make sense of how the Hecata have got to where they are, why they exist, you kind of have to look back. So here comes meta plot history, lore lesson. You kind of have to look at what happens to the Cappadocians and the Harbingers. So go all the way back to the infamous event known as the Feast of Folly, where Cappadocius addresses his clan, and this is all very much parable. He didn't literally do all of this in the canon as I see it. He addresses his clan, and he says, which of you have done this? Which of you have done that? Which of you have done that? Which of you haven't done that? Okay, everyone who matches this criteria, you all go in this underground city. They all go in the underground city. He seals it off and says, you can't leave. That's called the Feast of Folly. The majority of the vampires who were trapped down there were the vampires who were already known as Harbingers, but became known as Harbingers of Skulls. Now, while they were down there, most of them ate each other, fell to cannibalism because there were no mortals down there. And some of them traveled through the Shadowlands. They went into the underworld. They found the underworld city of Enoch. They dwelled there for a while. They developed rituals so they could snatch mortals from the other side of the shroud and feed. But their need to feed had reduced significantly because they were in the underworld now. A lot of them lost their sense of self, their identity, because of things like the river Styx, the river Lethe, it wipes your memory, that sort of thing. It's all very Wraith the Oblivion-like. So all this is going on, but the one constant that the Harbingers have is we fucking hate our antediluvian because he's treated us like a bunch of punks and locked us up. And we didn't do anything to deserve this. He's basically an abusive father figure. He's trying to make himself feel better by locking us up. By the time they start emerging from the other side of the shroud, they realize that their antediluvian is dead, that their Cappadocian brothers and sisters are dead. They've been superseded by the devil kindred known as the Giovanni.
Monsters.
Yeah. And so the Harbingers are, in theory, consumed with this rage against the Giovanni. But why? Because the Giovanni did what the Harbingers wanted done. They wanted Cappadocius dead. Well, congratulations, he's dead. Their brothers and sisters didn't help them. They stood by while they were incarcerated, and the Giovanni dealt with them as well. If anything, the Harbingers should be going up to the Giovanni and shaking them by the hand, saying, thank you very much, you did our job for us. But the Harbingers are consumed with the need for vengeance for a couple of reasons. One is against the Camarilla, because some of the Harbingers are Cappadocians who hid in the underworld during the Giovanni Purge, and the Camarilla did nothing to stop the Purge. Two, they hate the Giovanni because they see the Giovanni as tools of their antediluvian. They believe that Cappadocius basically went through a system of purges. This was his philosophy. He purged the Harbingers. He purged the Cappadocians, using the Giovanni to do so. And now the Harbingers miraculously were let out of the Shadowlands, and they start thinking, are we tools of our antediluvian to now purge the Giovanni? And so they hated the Giovanni because the Giovanni were basically puppets of the antediluvian, but the Harbingers, through their sort of deranged philosophy, started thinking, or maybe accurate philosophy, started thinking, well, hang on, have we now just been plonked back onto the earth to get rid of the next failed experiment of this, our abusive father figure? And so vampires among the Harbingers, among the Giovanni, among the surviving Cappadocians and so on, start exchanging information. Word does start to spread that, you know what, we're not going to be treated like shit anymore. And we are going to go against what our father wants. And the Giovanni manifest this in a way not dissimilar to the Anarch Revolt 500 years prior, and they start chopping off the heads of the Methuselahs and Elders who have been pushing them around for centuries. And the Harbingers kind of high-five them and say, yes, this is what we need to be doing. We don't need to do it to ourselves, mind you, because, we've already been punished enough. Yes. And so they preserve their numbers. And ultimately, what's left coagulates as the Hecata, a new clan of death. Now, from the Giovanni perspective, there's a completely different reason for this. It's because they know that their promise of independence from the Camarilla and the Sabbat and the Jihad is coming to an end in little over, I guess, 6 years. Mm-hmm. And that means they need to find allies, because at some point, the Gehenna Crusade, Italy isn't that far away from North Africa and the Middle East. Eventually, the Gehenna Crusade is going to start looking at them. And if they don't have any allies, their goose will be cooked. So they start befriending other necromancers from other disparate bloodlines. And so you get lots of different reasons for coming together. They're not friends. They're not trusted associates. They are a port in a storm that shares a common philosophy of death, hatred, and distrust of the wider kindred society. Yeah. And they have let everyone think that their clan is dramatically weakened, that they were targeted by the Second Inquisition, that their elders were all destroyed and things like that. And this is why they have retreated to Venice and other such provinces. Mm-hmm. When in actual fact, as a unified bloc, distrustful of each other as they are arguably the strongest clan in V5, because they have one thing that not one other clan has, and that is none of them have succumbed to the beckoning.
Right.
Not one Hecata has been pulled toward wherever the other elder vampire is being pulled. So the few elders and Methuselahs among the Hecata that are still up and kicking around, completely unmoved by all of that. Mm-hmm. So that means they can start embracing powerful vampires, and they can start reinforcing their own forces and becoming a block of necromancers, another sect, if you will, by the time the promise comes to an end, which means they will be players on the stage at that point. Mm-hmm. So again, very long-winded, but that is, for the most part, the reason the Hecata forms.
No, I think it's great. It's just a bunch of people who want to hang out and like bones.
Yeah, that too.
That too. What I like.
You like raising corpses? I too appreciate raising corpses.
Zombies are pretty neat.
Yeah.
One of the things I liked is that you took bloodlines with the Hecata and you made them into like their own version of the lore sheet, basically.
Yeah.
It is a lore sheet, essentially, and I like that, so that you're no longer focused on what can this person do, what is, how are these people special and unique, and they get their own special cool discipline. They all have the same stuff, it's just they have cool powers and the cool benefits that go with it.
Yeah, it differentiates them from each other. And yeah, they do function identically to lore sheets, except, I guess you could take a bloodline sheet and a descendant of sheet as long as they didn't clash.
Right.
But yeah, that was an idea of Eddie Webb's, who is a frequent collaborator, another in-house developer at ONYX Path, to make bloodlines function that way. And I think it works perfectly. It means that the game feels less drenched in superfluous bloodlines when you can kind of rationalize them as just another lore sheet, just another kind of system of backgrounds that you can buy. So yeah, I really think that it's quite an elegant way of presenting bloodlines and minor families of the Giovanni.
I thought it was really cool because when you play these games revised in V20 and the earlier editions, and you always have that player who wants to come in and be like, oh yeah, well I'm the Kiasid who's also, my dad is a white howler and my mom is a true mage, and
oh, that's my character.
Yeah, and it's just like I got all this special stuff that I can do, and I have like I have all the fun disciplines and the cool powers, and also I'm a Barley, and I changed my mind, and also I'm a child of Osiris, and it's just like you don't have to deal with that anymore because everyone's the same. If you're a Hecata and you're a child of Tenochtitlan, then you're still a Hecata. You just have some cool background stuff to go with it, and that solves this special problem.
Exactly. So it'll be interesting to see if when other bloodlines pop up that aren't in the Hecata, One could argue the descendant of lore sheets already fill that function retroactively, but if not, whether we will start seeing Kiersey, True Brewha, God help us, and so on as bloodline sheets, you never know. I hope so. I hope we do. I just don't know how soon it will be.
Yeah, but I think it also neatly solves the problem of things like True Brewha that aren't supposed to exist.
Oh yeah. It's you basically just make a lore sheet that inverts their bane and makes their celerity function differently at different levels and things like that, and all of a sudden you've explained away Temporis without making them time traveling vampires that all exist in every single Vampire the Masquerade LARP.
Right.
There's always one True Brewha pretending to be a vampire of another clan. They sit in the corner of the LARP space, brooding quietly, watching everyone and having a ball. They love it. This is what they sign up for. But I'm not. I am mocking. So you know.
I know. I love to go to social events and not talk to anyone. That's what.
To be honest, that is what I do.
Yeah.
But. So maybe I should be playing more True Brewha. That's a good thought.
Yeah, there you go.
Maybe I already have, and because of their time travel power, I just haven't realized it yet.
Oh, yeah. The True Brewha was inside us all along.
You met her and you didn't even know
it. Yeah. do you have some questions?
Yes. No, it's okay. I'm going to do it.
Okay.
I'm going to do it, CT Phipps. I see you, reading you. I'm going to try and pronounce this one, as we know I'm not very good at that. The Chronicle for the Cults of the Blood Gods brings back Constancia. There's no N in it. You misspelled it.
Well, they misspelled it. It is Constancia, though.
Trying to catch me out. That's what they're doing. As a zombie queen. How did you come up with that? Is vampire resurrection a thing now?
That's a very good question. What does it actually mean for other vampires who may be wraiths and want to be resurrected or such? I think some of that's got to be left to storyteller discretion. Bringing her back as a risen, essentially, was a choice we made because we wanted to have her present in the story as an antagonist, but we wanted to give her a unique... I guess model, if you like. She wasn't. We didn't just want a rebel Hecata. We wanted something that would throw the clan and the broader city into a bit of a fit. Yeah, over how are we going to deal with this aberration? And so I wouldn't say it's by any means going to be the norm that vampires keep coming back as zombies. But I like the opening because I like vampires having a plethora of antagonists that aren't just other playable creatures in World of Darkness games. And one of the antagonist types that's barely used is wights. They've existed since first edition, but they barely show up because everyone just sees them as blood-crazed, frenzying, drooling monsters. Mm-hmm. Well, I think wights can have a lot more to them than that, but beyond that, think of other undead monsters. Think of other kind of shades of mortal monsters. Like I introduced the Knight's Cross Hunter cell in Chicago Folios, I think is where they first popped up, and then they come up again and let the streets run in. And they're just a sort of local good old boy paramilitary sect in the middle of Chicago. They aren't a real threat, but they are another shade to the Second Inquisition. They're another kind of threat that your vampires may come across. And anyone familiar with the work that I do on games like They Came From will know I love a good bestiary. I did it for Werewolf the Forsaken with Shunned by the Moon. I love to present lots of different antagonists because they often become what a story centers on. So Constancia was... the way she appears in this story was a direct result of that kind of agenda.
I love a bestiary. I love it. I love going through them. Like my very, very first RPG book was a monsters manual from D&D, and I never played D&D for like years after that. But I love just going through and thinking, oh, okay, that's cool. And I it's one of the things I feel that that World of Darkness books have lacked is having those bestiaries where you can look up antagonists, you can look up things that are cool to encounter, and you can throw them into the world. When I was running Mage, I would bring up the Bygone bestiary whenever I could. I'm just like, this is fun, let's do that.
Yeah. Mage 20 has Gods and Monsters that does that. And we've got the Paranormal Investigator's Handbook coming out for Ghost Hunters for World of Darkness, which has cryptids, all kinds of new undead in, you know, so if you want Chupacabra and the Mothman and things like that, that they will be there for World of Darkness in that book.
It's the Chupacabra.
The Chupacabra.
It's the Chupacabra.
Yeah, the Goat Man.
I think it's just everybody's like when you're young and you see those movies for the first time, and it's always that huge heavy tome they lift up and then they open the pages and it's just pictures of beasts.
Fun.
Everybody wants one, and that's what the bestiary is. It's like basically that little version of, oh, look at all these creatures. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. There is a second question, which comes from Dragonspire, not our friend CT Phipps for once. Bless his face. How do you find the creative collaboration process on large projects such as this? Is it challenging when you have multiple writers for one area, or easier, or both? Do you have a favorite part of collaborative writing?
Oh, that's a really good question. Don't often get asked about process. So it's actually a part of the hiring process that I look at more closely than some developers, and that's I like to work with people who I know are good team workers. Sometimes, you know, you want to work with a really great independent writer who can just go off and hammer out 20,000 words in the course of a week. That they are great, especially when they're mechanics writers too. But other times you need people who want to collaborate using the team's Slack or email distribution list. You want people who share ideas and critique other people's ideas as well in a kind and generous, constructive manner. In pretty much every major project, like Chicago by Night, Cults of the Blood Gods, although I think we did it for some of the source books too, the smaller ones, I always have meetings with writers at the start of the process, so we can get ideas down, sort of do's, do nots. There's already a written outline, but I like to talk to them too, get their ideas at that stage. We'll often catch up again later in another big team meeting. But acknowledging that some people do this part-time, most people do this part-time. The role-playing game industry isn't the best paid industry in the world, and most people can't afford to do this, you know, as their full-time job. I'm very fortunate that I can, but I also admittedly work my ass off constantly for lots of different companies to be able to pay a mortgage with an RPG writer's salary. But yeah, the process can be challenging and it's unpredictable, because sometimes you will really need people to work together on something and a writer will ghost you, will just disappear. And they may write their content, but they maybe just weren't in the mood for collaborating. And you don't know what's going on in their lives that has prevented them from doing so. Sometimes they'll just disappear entirely, and that's a risk with freelancers, and everyone in this industry, almost everyone is a freelancer. It means that, you know, you have no control over whether someone puts pen to paper or finger to key when you need them to, other than their contract asking that they do, that they've signed up to. So there's books like Chicago by Night, which is one of the best collaborations I've ever worked on, where every single writer was incredibly enthusiastic, creative. Everyone was sharing ideas, complimenting and criticizing each other's ideas. It was a brilliant project to be on. The mood was constantly upbeat. We worked hard to make that book what it is. I've worked on other books, and I won't name them, where the collaborative process has been dire, and it's been like trying to get blood out of a stone, trying to get any form of collaboration from your colleagues. So there isn't a tried and tested. Well, there are tried and tested methods, but there's no foolproof method because you're working with individuals with individual lives, individual needs, individual speeds, and writing qualities and experience, and all those kind of factors become a part of the challenge. But I really enjoy being the developer on these big projects because I'm a pretty good team manager. I've got experience managing teams in various other industries as well. I can hurry people along. I can speak to people on a personal level. I can do all of that. So it's very rarely stressful and unpleasant.
Yeah.
But sometimes it is difficult because you're very much reliant on everyone else. So you really have to push them all forward. That's a very woolly answer because there isn't a single good answer. But yeah, I enjoy it. Even when it's challenging, I enjoy it. So otherwise, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, that's fair. So how is it you got into professional TTRPG work? Because obviously, you say sort of everybody's a freelancer sort of thing. How did you get? How did you start to become to where you are now? Sort of thing.
So I had submitted work or writing samples before with the aim of getting hired to work on books, but I wasn't ever really successful. And I thought, well, I'm clearly getting something wrong. And so what I did was when Werewolf the Apocalypse 20th Anniversary Edition was on Kickstarter, I thought there's a level on this Kickstarter for something called a consulting developer. And you had to pledge a fair amount for it. And so I sold off some of my games and I pledged to become a consulting developer because what I wanted to do was sit in on a project, which is what the consulting developers do, and just observe and take notes and occasionally ask questions as long as I wasn't interfering with anyone's work. I wanted the benefit of essentially watching how other people worked and other people's successes and failures and observing how the developer did things like red lines, which is a form of editing and proofing, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what I gained through doing that, and I'm not suggesting everyone needs to follow this path by any means, and it's not a surefire thing anyway. But what I gained was the equivalent of a creative writing course in my mind. I paid for it. I paid as much as I would have for a creative writing course lasting 6 weeks or so, which is basically how long this process lasted. I went away and then I wrote a new submission for ONYX Path. I sent a writing sample in. I was then hired a week or two later to work on a Mummy the Curse book. And after that, I just kept getting work. I would introduce myself to developers on books and say, hey, I worked on this book. By all means, check with that developer to see how they found my work. I'm looking for more work. Please hire me. I'd do this over and over again. I'd introduce myself to a new developer here, new developer there. And networking, essentially. I would go to conventions back when they were a physical thing, and I would go to companies I'd not worked for before, and I'd say, hey, I've got these credits under my belt with a company like ONYX Path, but I really love your game and I'd love a chance to work on it. And then I would start working for other companies. So this all built up, and I was just writing in the evenings and weekends, while juggling relationship and family and a full-time job. And so it was very tiring. And I got to a point with my full-time job. Well, I got to a point with the freelancing where I had been working on a video game and it was very well paid. And I thought, I can actually give up my full-time job now. I can work on this video game full-time and I can do the TTRPG stuff on the side. And so I left my full-time job, which was probably going to be coming to an end soon anyway due to various redundancies. And then the video game got cancelled.
Oh no!
But luckily I had been in talks around that time with Rich Thomas at ONYX Path about becoming full-time on the TTRPG side at ONYX Path if the video game stuff didn't work out. And as it didn't, we sped things up from where we were planning on doing it, and I became an in-house developer at ONYX PATH, one of the first ones. And I'm not full-time employed. I'm still a contractor. I'm still able to work for any other company, and I sometimes do. I still work on board games, card games, video games, role-playing games, anything I can write. I was mentioning before we started recording, I've written essays, for history, for horror history books, things like that. I will write what I get paid to write, and for the most part, I really enjoy doing it. But this entire process took about 4 or 5 years before I could make it tenable as a full-time one. And the only way I was able to do that was through my relationship with ONYX PATH. The fact that I had built up enough of a rapport with the company. They knew I was reliable. They knew that my work was of a decent enough quality where they could trust me to develop this many books in a year, write this much word count in a year, do this, do that. If you can manage all of these things, we will ensure that you get paid this amount monthly. So that kind of security is what allows me to do this on a full-time basis, that I know that regardless of how good or bad a month is, I will still get paid this much.
Yes.
And most freelancers who don't have that kind of contract are, as I was before, just working book to book, not knowing necessarily exactly when they're going to get paid, when their books are going to come out, that sort of thing. So, yeah. So that's my story.
Did you catch Jeff's newbie question, Ree?
I have got it right here waiting. Yeah.
Let's go ahead and answer a newbie question.
So Last Sonjit, I probably said that very wrong, said, I am a complete noob to vampire. Is there such thing as half vampires / humans in the game, like Blade from the MCU?
Yeah, so, well, in previous editions, they were known as Dampiers, or Dampiers. There's rules for them in Beckett's Jihad Diary, in fact, which I have up there. But in this edition, the closest thing you've got is Thin Bloods, which are pretty much the same thing, because they are vampires whose magically potent blood isn't so magically potent that they suffer all of the ailments of being a vampire. You get to choose which ailments you suffer from when you create your character. So maybe your character can walk in the day. Maybe your character doesn't just subsist off of blood, but they likewise have flaws to balance those merits out, such as, well, they still need to drink blood, but their teeth are dull, so they can't just bite into people, or their skin is necrotic, so they will never pass for human, even though they are still technically human. So yeah, there are such rules in V5.
Yeah. There were a few more questions, but they seem to have them answered by a lot of the chat, which was things like, is there such a thing as a celestial sort of an anti-vampire, which our good friend C.T. Phipps there has answered with imbued. An example of that. Imbued. Sorry, I can't pronounce things today. Imbued. I should be able to say that word.
Well, I mean, the imbued don't exist yet in V5.
No.
I wouldn't be surprised if they do eventually. But likewise, I wouldn't be surprised if Hunter, because they're from a game called Hunter the Reckoning, takes on a more street-level mundane horror theme to match the Second Inquisition, essentially. They're not going around holding crosses and channeling the power of God. They are just highly skilled paramilitary outfits with knowledge of how vampires can be defeated. But yeah, in previous editions, the imbued were mortals who had the power of God, angels, something that allowed them to destroy creatures of the darkness. Some people loved them, some people didn't.
Fair.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to our very last thing, which was really cool of you to let us do. You gave us backer copies of Children of Blood, so we got a chance to actually look at Children of Blood, and this was so cool. I loved the material in it. I mean, I've loved everything. I will admit that initially I was really skeptical of 5th edition Vampire for a lot of reasons. But having sat down and actually looked through it and read the book and seen it, there have been a lot of really good changes to it in terms of mechanics and lore and really evolving the game for a more modern night in a modern setting. Um, and I'm going to go ahead and let Stacey talk about Cleopatra's because we've been waiting all night to do that.
Oh yeah, I was very excited about the lore sheet for Cleopatra's. I think the thing that picked it out for me was the interesting part where Nosferatu, who are very stereotypically ugly, hideous, it was basically a fake it till you make it rule. It's just like essentially they'd become so confident that when they dressed themselves up, people just wouldn't notice how ugly they were. And I straight up vibed with that, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I was just like, yes, confidence is key. Confidence is attractiveness. And so for the Nosferatu, it was a case of, yeah, my face is scarred, hideous, and ugly, but you're not going to notice because I'm wearing it like a blouse. And I love that. I love that. I was just like, yes, I'm vibing with this.
Go ahead.
So my main question was, since that's my favorite lore sheet, out of the new lore sheets, because there's quite a lot in that book, which one's your favorite?
Ooh, that's a very good question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm challenging you today.
So my favorite lore sheet in Children of the Blood in particular. I mean, I could say that Cleopatra's, and I would be being honest because I really do like them, and I love the character who was a part of the Cleopatra's in that book as well, Belinda Buke.
Yes.
Because again, she is not by any means a traditional Nosferatu. She's grey skin, pointy bat ears, that kind of thing. But I think the Amaranthans are high up there for me. The essentially vampires who hunt down diablerists. It's a very simple concept. They think that diablerie is the ultimate sin. They're probably right. And they, in a cultish way, believe it is their divine duty to destroy all diablerists. It's a nice, simple concept. They're not a cult in an organized way. They probably all act independently of each other and spread tales, like Highlanders. But they are all drawn to destroy diablerists. And I think the lore sheet balances out playing a character like that in a really interesting way. But yeah, I'm happy with a lot of that. Also, the Milliners bloodline, and the Rossellini, but mostly the Milliners. Grudge Masters bloodline sheet is a favorite of mine.
You brought up Belinda Buke. A lot of people brought up Belinda Buke. I loved her not only because it shows that Nosferatu can be ugly in a different way. It's like a really inventive way of being ugly and horrifying, but also because she's Danish and there's a lot of subtle shade about Denmark in there in her whole bio and back. It's like, oh yeah, she lives in Nordborg. Yeah, okay, yeah, she does look like the kind of bitch who would live in Nordborg. Yeah.
I think the best part is just the creepiness,
the whole. She looks like every fake looking Danish social media influencer who's living their perfect Danish life with their two, and I just love that because also it lets me make fun of Danish people, which is a pastime of mine living here in Denmark.
My co-developer on that book, as well as the author of The Sacrifice and Power Prey, and one of the upcoming playable stories in Trails of Ash and Bone is Clara Herbal, who is a very talented creator, and she lives in Denmark as well. She didn't write Belinda Buke, but it was through conversations with her that I'm able to write. I wrote Belinda Buke. I was very happy to do that. And I visited Denmark plenty of times. We ended up simply because of a movie Clara showed me once. We gave focus to Christiania in Copenhagen in the Anarch book. I think I wrote that up simply because of that. So and in fact the Odense Pact, where that's what basically why the Banu Hakim got into the Camarilla. They formed a pact in a kitchen in a restaurant in Odense, which is a small city in Denmark. So there's a lot in V5 that takes place in Denmark,
it's
considering what a small country it is. It's got a chain of disparate islands linked by bridges and blood.
Yeah, that's very accurate, and it's really cool because the last third of our chronicle for the Badger game is actually set in Copenhagen.
Well, that's where Belinda is prince.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to bring her up, and we'll let you
know.
She appears again in Trails of Ash and Bone. So yeah. I'm a fan of that character, and I wasn't sure. I'm very happy with her artwork. Don't get me wrong, but I knew it would be difficult to convey that kind of plastic, expressionless face through art because art, illustrations are static by nature. But I think it does the job. She just has a glazed over look to her, which works.
I cannot tell you. I live in a fairly wealthy part of my town, and I cannot tell you the number of women that I encounter on a daily basis that look exactly like her, and it's so weird. It's cool.
And it's Stepford wife aesthetic.
Yeah, but it's really cool that you can see that as a horror element to something that's ugly, and you can take something that is pretty and make it ugly. And I love that, and it turns the whole idea on its head that you don't have to be like ugly, like you don't have to be horrifying to be horrifying, basically. And I thought that was a really cool idea.
I think I finally, and again this is Trails of Ash and Bone, so it's not out yet, but I think I finally managed to get my Nosferatu, who is, I always talk about this as a Nosferatu deformity, someone who is completely covered in head to toe in fingernails. And
I'm already grossed out,
and clacks and crunches as they walk, and they rub against each other. And I've always spoken about that as a way of making a Nosferatu horrifying. And we finally put that Nosferatu in a book.
Can you tell me so I don't buy it? No, I'm kidding. That's really
smack it out.
But that's the thing. I think you can be very creative with Nosferatu, and I know Karim Paradox and myself are very tired of bat ears, small nostrils, big pointy front teeth, all of that. When you can make someone physically horrifying, abnormal, uncanny valley or whatever, in a really interesting way by using human features, by giving them hair where they shouldn't have hair, or giving them overly enlarged eye sockets so their eyeballs have fallen back into their heads, and things like that. Really small amendments, but still horrifying.
I think
someone made me laugh in chat because Baron Snowhound had just written Nosferatu and I lost it. I was just like, oh.
That's their sire made entirely of toenails.
Nosferatu. But one of the things, though, is it's really easy to fall into this idea of, to touch on a social subject, to touch on this idea of ableism.
Yeah.
And to make somebody who's disabled into a monster.
Mm-hmm.
And to make their disability what makes them inhuman. So what I liked about this change with the Nosferatu and giving them the ability to be beautiful and also inhuman, it shows that in a way that perfection itself is inhuman. It is monstrous in its own way, and trying to achieve that perfection is in a way damaging. And you can get too caught up in the idea of trying to overcome a disability, or you can take something like the Cleopatra and you can just embrace it. Like, yeah, I'm ugly, but also I'm fabulous, and who cares?
Mm-hmm. I think my first inspiration for something like that was actually in Vampire the Requiem, where Nosferatu are first basically described as unsettling and haunting. They're not necessarily physically hideous, but they leave you feeling uneasy and nauseous, that kind of thing. And in one of the Bloodlines books for Requiem, there was a bloodline called called the Galloi, and the Galloi were hideously beautiful. They were absolutely perfect to look at, and the way they achieved it was not only by drinking blood, but also by bathing in blood. They basically did the sort of Elizabeth Bathory thing, and that always stuck with me. And so I'm glad to have been able to move that into Masquerade now, because we've taken a lot from Requiem Second Edition, which is a game I love, absolutely love. Touchstones are in Requiem Second Edition, Blood Potencies in Requiem Second Edition. Well, Covenants are, and Covenants kind of fill the same role as cults, and cults of the Blood Gods. So getting unsettlingly beautiful Nosferatu from Requiem is, I think, only fair as well. Next, it'll be the Mechets. We'll get them over.
Yay!
Do we have some more questions?
Yes.
I think I saw Jeff had one too.
Yeah, is it possible to play a cursed character like Dorian Gray as a vampire?
Probably not exactly like Dorian Gray. If anything, I would say Dorian Gray has more in common with some of the Eternals and other such creatures in Mummy the Curse, which is a Chronicles of Darkness game. Mummy the Curse Second Edition has Immortals as one of the sort of antagonists or secondary characters. One type of which is Eternals, who manage to basically store their immortality in a relic, which is, of course, entirely endangered because of it, but for as long as it's kept safe, they are able to retain their eternal beauty and health. You don't really have characters like that in World of Darkness, but I could quite easily see a mage, an awakened, working some life and prime magic to store their essence in an artifact, although I imagine the majority of the traditions would probably frown on it, potentially as a bit vulgar, especially as you age. Paradox might come to snatch you up, not the company, but the effect might come to snatch you up because you are breaching all manner of consensus by existing for 300 years without aging,
We've got CT Phipps coming back at us again with the do you have any other favorite SPCs other than Belinda? Also, why is it Father Christian Patriot?
Oh, Father Christian Patriot. So Father Christian Patriot was another character I wrote. So I shouldn't say that he's a favorite so much. I like sometimes taking swipes at assholes and people with Twitter bios that describe themselves as father.christian.patriot. Yes. As if that somehow qualifies them as good or righteous. Just makes me want to vomit. So having a vampire whose epithet, not his actual name, is father, as in the head of a church, Christian Patriot, as though that's his name, worked for me. He's just a dreadful far right cult leader of the, I guess, Trump school of thoughts, except now he probably wouldn't identify with Trump because he considers himself, Father Christian Patriot considers himself very sort of grassroots working class. I pulled myself up from nothing, so how dare other vampires or other mortals come over here and try and take what's mine? From a horror perspective, a mundane, our world horror perspective, I find that kind of bigotry more insidious and frightening than establishment level prejudice. If you're already millionaires or billionaires or whatever, and you're trying to hold people down, I don't empathize, I don't sympathize, but I understand why you're trying to do that.
Yeah.
What I find troubling, especially because, sometimes I think a lot of us who come from poor backgrounds, let's say, and I've not come from money or education or anything like that, can develop a chip on their shoulder if they see someone getting something that they were never given. Mm-hmm. And the question is whether the person deals with it in a healthy way, or whether they let the resentment sort of overcome them. And characters like Father Christian Patriot are like the people in our world who do start off with nothing, do work hard to get what they have, and then jealously hoard it and see absolutely anyone else who is coming close to it as a potential enemy, as an interloper, an intruder, someone who's trying to steal my property, my land, my things, my woman, whatever it happens to be. So yeah, he was an interesting character to write, because it was basically writing that from a vampire perspective. Mm-hmm. But he's got obviously a lot of roots in horror we have to deal with. But in terms of characters I enjoy that I didn't write, Baptiste is one of my favorites, because he is a horrible, horrible character. It was something we wanted to do with Children of the Blood, make every single character a potential supporting character, so an ally or an enemy. Mm-hmm. And Baptiste really straddles that line for me. I think he would be hard to get on with, but I can absolutely identify why he's useful to have around. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he's a nasty piece of work. Mm-hmm. And I really like, I think it's Derek Robertson, mm-hmm. Who is the very tragic Bruja character who traveled down to London, to essentially get a job or get some money to take back to his family, and got embraced, could never return to his family again, who probably died in poverty, and has served as a heavy for the Mithraists in London ever since, mostly because he has nothing else. He just has nothing else, and he's a tragic, almost Frankenstein's monster kind of character, and ends up gracing the cover of Children of the Blood in that Frankenstein's monster kind of a way. I'm holding up this young person. What have I done? What have I done? Sort of thing. I like that kind of character as well. Tragedy has a firm place in my vampire mental space.
Yeah, no, it's a game that lines heavily into tragedy, and it's.
I was gonna say, what is role play without some serious pain? Like, you can role play being happy all the time, but that gets a bit boring. Yeah. It's nice to be happy in real life. It's nice to explore things that you don't want to explore in real life, in fake life. Yeah. We have another question, and I really want to know the answer to this. I'm very engaged in this. I was just in this, and I'm like, damn, Jairus.
I want to know. Yeah.
Jairus has asked, this is Ricky Dorada, has asked, do you subscribe to the theory that Kane is just a taxi driver in New York?
No, he's a taxi driver in LA.
He is, yeah. He's in a video game, didn't you know?
Yeah. I don't subscribe to the idea of Kane at all. In my games of vampires, if you speak to elders and Methuselahs for long enough, which isn't something I would recommend, they will say things to you like, well, my sire was around before Judaism. So if Cain was a product of that mythos, yes, fair enough, it's referring to their history. What does that make a vampire like Mithras or Set? Now, the vampire in the Church of Cain, the Gnostic, might say, well, that's a good point, but your Set and your Mithras are just vampires claiming the name of Set and Mithras. To which the Methuselah says, possibly so, but your Cain is just a vampire claiming the name of Cain as
Yeah.
well. You know, prove it otherwise. Just because your book is the most popular one, because it's the most popular book in the mortal world as well, doesn't mean it's any more right than my belief. And so I like having multiple choice, you know. I don't there's no reason for there to be one canonical answer. And in fact, in Vampire the Masquerade of old, there never was. The reason people came to assume, and books ended up changing to fit this narrative, that the Cainite myth was the one true way in Vampire, was because of the Book of Nod being released. And the Book of Nod was supposed to be just an artifact book, that was supposed to be completely subjective, not at all an historical tome. But players bought it, and because it was an artifact book and they read it, they assumed, well, this text, just like the Bible, is utterly accurate.
Yeah.
This is telling us the history of vampire, but that wasn't its purpose. But eventually things changed, and when you get to a book like Gehenna, which pretty much confirms the Abrahamic view of things, it, to my mind, makes everything a little too clean cut.
That was one of the issues that I had with that whole series of books when everything ended, is it went really hard in on the Judeo-Christian thing, and it really didn't take other perspectives and other moralities into point of view. And I really like that we have, in the last 15-20 years, really evolved beyond that, and we've started taking in those perspectives, and we've started taking those perspectives really seriously. And we're looking at it not just through this cultural lens of the white European, but we're looking at it through these other cultures that are actually very deeply integrated into the world around us. And we're changing the paradigm, not just to accommodate people that are already here, but to expand the impressions of people who have bought into this for so long. It's like, oh, okay, well, maybe, yeah. You know, that does make sense. It's a good point. You know, my sire's been around since before Judaism, so why would it be Cain and Abel? You know, maybe there's somebody else.
And it's obviously Lilith.
Yeah, obviously. Hi, hello.
Yeah. Right, well, I'm going to have to wrap up soon, so any last questions to hit me with?
I've got 3 really quick fire questions.
Oh, okay.
So, number 1, who would win in a fight, Lucifer or Cain?
Lucifer. Cain would be feeling too sorry for himself, and every single time he punched Lucifer and burned his hand, he would blame God rather than himself for punching a literal angel of fire.
Fair points. Which antediluvian would be the most frightening to wake up?
Good question, as if they're not already awake. God, none of them would be the sort of person you'd invite round for dinner.
Meet my parents. Mom, Dad, antediluvian.
Yes, this is my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, Enoia. Sorry, yes, she's just become part of the floor.
Well, that's inconvenient.
I think there's an Akira Tetsuo primordial fear to the eldest, the Zemishi antediluvian, that makes a lot of sense. You know, no one wants that roiling over towards them. You've got to hope that at least Hakim would kill you quickly. At least you wouldn't know what's going on with the Ventru antediluvian, because you'd just be in your mind immediately. But yeah, the eldest would probably make you a part of it, or them. So I think you wouldn't die. I think you would just live forever as part of the eldest. Yeah, so probably the eldest. Let's go for that.
You're now my new armpit. How do you feel?
No.
And last question. What's one adversary that isn't in the system that you would love to add?
As in, like, so a new World of Darkness core line, or just an
Let's
antagonist?
just stick with just sort of an adversary for the sort of. Let's stick with vampire for now. An adversary you'd want to put in that doesn't already exist.
That's an interesting question as well, because I've had the liberty to add most things I want.
It's like when someone says, "So what character do you want to play next?" And you go, "I have played so many."
Yeah. Something aquatic, something from beneath the sea, maybe crab folk that are wearing human skins that are all communists and can only walk sideways.
Oh, yeah,
I love
that's
it.
a good choice.
Yeah, I think I've got a picture of them somewhere. Yeah,
it sounds very familiar to this book that I know of.
Yeah, well, it's a fantastic book. It's a very reasonable price as well. Crab people, 185. So yeah, crab people. There you go. There's a crab person.
Oh, I love him. He is shaped like a friend.
Beautiful and terrifying, and that
he's a member of the prefecture of the pod. Those are robotic legs.
Yeah,
that is the thing of nightmares there.
We didn't actually get the crab people on camera. Can we hold that up again?
Oh no. Yeah, I'll do it again.
But just put them in front of your face as if you are a crab person.
But no.
Sorry.
That's all right.
There we go. There's the crab person.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. I don't know. As a serious answer, that is the kind of thing I would need to think on. Other than, I'm actually a big fan of Demon the Fallen in principle, not necessarily in practice. I would do a lot with Demon if I could for 5th edition. And I would love to see demons present in Vampire, not in a earthbound Barley kind of a way, but in a more spiritual possession, Pazuzu sort of a way. I think that would be fun to mix up with your with Vampire. So let's have them as the adversary. That is what they are.
I like it.
Thank
you.
And I think that's enough. I don't see that we have any more questions.
No, we're good.
We're good. So let's go ahead and wrap it up and say good night. And let's say thank you to Matthew for being here with us and staying with us for the whole 3 hours. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for taking away that's so much of your time.
My invoice is in the post.
Oh.
And
you can send it to Jane Jarris for getting the question wrong.
Yeah.
Ricky Dorada.
Ricky Dorada, yeah, world-class hero, Ricky Dorada. He's so great.
Thank you so much, all of you, everyone who's watched, everyone who's listened, and for both of you lovely hosts. You've been fantastic, and I've really loved being here and talking about these brilliant games I get to work on.
Yeah, this is way cooler than I thought it would be. like I had high expectations, which is just like boom, right off, through the roof. So, but let's go ahead and say goodbye. Once again, I'm Lee. I have been your storyteller and host this evening. We have Ree with us, who is by the Malkavian, on our Sunday night Vampire the Masquerade stream. So come and watch us. Thank you to Beetle and Grims. Thank you to all of our supporters. Thank you to Ben Sound, who makes our theme music, Hip Jazz, from bensound.com. Again, support us by subscribing through Twitch. And you can get more fun, fantastic content like the Monday night Great British Brush Off. Tuesdays our Basin game by Free Liga. Thursday we have Riders of the Runelords by Peso. On Saturdays, the Badgers podcast drops. And if you listen to it, you personally delight the specific Chris who runs it. And you can hear fun stories from people like me and other Badgers. And on Sundays, we have Vampire the Masquerade, which we will be skipping for next week. So join us on the 18th of April, where we start our city of Berlin, and we find out what happened with Mr. Waffles, what he did to them. Yeah, everyone loves Mr. Waffles.
I'm currently driving his van, so
you are. Yeah. And we'll talk more about that later.
Van, yeah.
But we'll go ahead and say good night to everyone, and thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for sticking with us. So we love you. And we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
And then we are.